and Pam.
So we're going to get started and pray and do our session for today. We're going to be talking about Last Supper to Crucifixion. We're going to read every gospel account from that time frame, and so it'll be a long night, however long God gives to do that. So let's pray. And Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for this solemn opportunity that we have to reflect back, to think back, and just meditate again on this unbelievable act that you did many years ago, and it gave us the crux of everything that shows us your undying love and your degree of humility and servitude to the cost of what you wanted to, again, before time ordained. It helps me, it helps us all to just keep perspective of things not being as good or bad as they seem, and always challenge ourselves to embrace the joy before us every moment we go through trials and traumas and pains as you did. And thank you just for all this opportunity we have to reflect on your mighty work and your mighty love. Be with us as our pastor, teacher, guide, and shepherd, coming bridegroom. Just may you guide us all in this time to reflect back and really resonate with what you've done for us. And thank you. We ask all this in Jesus, Yeshua's name. Amen. All right, so we're going to read and start with Matthew 26, and we're just going to pick it up and go right through. We're going to read. I'm just going to read verse for verse and just elaborate as God leads me. And this is going to be our tradition. And so Matthew 26 and verse 1, it occurred when Jesus had finished this discourse, he said to his disciples, meaning it's all of a discourse, most profound teaching of the second coming of Christ and all things leading to the end of the world. You know that 2 days hence comes the Passover, then the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified. So remember that. 2 days before Passover, he tells them, I'm going to be crucified. Verse 3, Matthew 26, about this time the high priest and the scribes and the elders of the people were convened in the palace of that high priest named Caiaphas. We're going to find over in the book of John, he's the only one that mentions Ananias and Caiaphas as high priest, two of them. Verse 4, Matthew 26, where they consulted how they might seize Jesus by stratagem and destroy him. We're also going to see in John, we saw last week, they were also strategizing to kill Lazarus also. That evidence was too damning for them. Verse 5, but they said, not during the feast, lest there should be a tumult among the people. Now while Jesus was at Bethany, in the house of Simon the leper, again about 2 miles out from Jerusalem, and between Bethany and Jerusalem is Bethphage, a woman came to him having an alabaster box of balsam, very valuable, which she poured on his head while reclining at the table. Some may say, hey, wait a minute, I thought he came to Palm Sunday, and he was hanging out, thought he was in Bethany. Remember, every night he spends in Jerusalem, where he spends the night, is out in Bethany. It's only a 2-mile journey. It's not very long. It's just again, you're talking about 40-minute walk at most. It's pretty not that big of a deal. But he would spend the night in Bethany, come back to Jerusalem. So this is happening 2 days before. Remember, 6 days before, Mary actually took the expensive and spikenard and washed his feet with her hair. This is 2 days before, and they're actually talking about how she pours this on his head while reclining at the table. In verse 8, and the disciples seeing it, again, unlike Judas, which was 4 days prior, who said, hey, we can sell that for more. They all, it says, and the disciples seeing it, or those disciples, which is his disciples, saying, why this extravagance? For this might have been sold at a great price and given to the poor. Jesus, knowing it, said to them, why do you trouble the woman? She has rendered me a kind office. For you have poor always among you, but me you have not always. For in pouring this balsam on my body, she did it to embalm me. As we know, balsam has a very good odor, and it's the process of embalming. So those who say that, since when do the Jews embalm? Well, not in the way we do it today, but there's a preparation for burial. Not in the same way we put fluids in the body, not like that, but they do prepare the body for burial. So again, this is interesting to note for those who say, how come they didn't cremate? Well, you don't embalm somebody if you're going to cremate them. That makes no sense. You embalm somebody if you're going to, again, you prepare the body if you're going to bury them. Verse 13, indeed I say to you, whatever these glad tidings may be proclaimed in the whole world that she has done will also be spoken of her remembrance. We don't know who this woman was, by the way, and yet it's talked about. Then that one of the 12, named Judas Iscariot, proceeding to the high priest. This is the only time after Palm Sunday you begin to see Judas jockeying for forcing the hand of Jesus to proclaim his deity, his messiahship, his kingship, to usher in the kingdom, because he understood Zechariah 9 and 10, no chapter or verse breaks, that was the beginning of the end. Verse 15 in Matthew 26, and he said, what are you willing to give me, and I will deliver him up to you? And they paid him 30 shekels. From that time he sought a fit occasion to deliver him up. Now on the first day of unleavened bread, now remember, Paschal lamb, Passover is on the 14th of Nisan, unleavened bread on the 15th. So it's not the same day or later the same day. It's a different day altogether, which speaks to repentance follows salvation. It doesn't accompany it, doesn't precede it, it follows it. It's not hard to figure out. So in verse 17 it says, and came Jesus saying, they came to Jesus, disciples did, and said, where does thou wish to we prepare for you the Paschal supper? He answered, go into the city, a certain person, and say to him, the teacher says, my time is near, I will celebrate the Passover at the house with my disciples. Disciples did as Jesus had ordered them, and they prepared the Passover. Now evening being come, he reclined at the table with the 12. Now remember, Passover, it starts off with saying, why is this night like any other night? And they begin to talk about the Paschal lamb sacrifice back in Exodus chapter 12. They relive and account all the 10 plagues of Egypt, leading up to, of course, the Exodus under the blood of the lamb on their doors and lintels, when the Father did that, forming the Kai for life, and the angel of death passed over them. But you will not find Jesus doing any of that at this Passover accounting of any of the gospel writers, which made all the apostles know this is not a normal Passover. So that statement, Jews state to this day, why is this night like any other night, must have been really resonating with these 12 men, given the fact that this is insane. He's not doing any of the traditions that he already has previously done 3 times. This is the 4th Passover of Jesus. But his first one, he began his ministry after the first year, the second year, the third one. This is his 4th one, the end of his 3 years. And other 3 times we know during his ministry he did it, not to mention as a youngin' with his parents, and in between, he's never once did anything different until now. Verse 21, it was evening, he came reclined at the table with the 12. Evening meaning, again, remember, 6 p.m. starts the new day. Leviticus 23 tells us that between the eves, celebrate Passover. So between 6 p.m. tonight, 6 p.m., I should say 6 p.m. Tuesday, and 6 p.m. tonight, you have to have done the Passover. 6 p.m. yesterday began Wednesday on a Jewish calendar, and 6 p.m. tonight, we're already on Thursday. So this many years ago, Jesus was already off the cross and in the tomb. We go back to, he says it's evening, and this reference is going back to what would be Tuesday night on our calendar, which would be the beginning of Wednesday on the Jewish calendar, which was yesterday for them. As they were eating, and he said, indeed I tell you that one of you will deliver me up. And being extremely sorrowful, they began each one to ask, Master, is it I? And he answering said, he who has been dipping his hand with mine in the dish, this one will deliver me up. The Son of Man indeed goes away to death, as it has been written concerning him, but alas for the man through whom that Son of Man is delivered up. Good were it be for that man, which is kalos, externally good, if he were not born. So people take this passage and say, well then how could Judas be saved? It's very simple. 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 20 to 22. You can read that differently. The worst place to be in this world is to know Jesus and disobey him. He's not talking about not being saved. It's about accountability. If you know Jesus and don't submit to his will and try to impose your own, that's the worst place you could be. So he says it's good for him not to have been born. Hi guys, married couple. He says, then that Judas who delivered him up inquired, Rabbi, is it I? He says to him, thou hast said. So Matthew 26, verse 26, he says, and as they were eating, Jesus, taking a loaf, giving praise, he broke and gave it to his disciples and said, take, eat, this is my body. Imagine Judas knowing he's going to betray him, and he said, is it I? Like, the kahunas on this guy to say that, knowing as if Jesus doesn't know. Verse 27, then taking a cup and giving thanks, he gave it to them, saying, drink all of you out of it. And this is my blood of the covenant, which again, a covenant with blood ratified makes it a testament. Matthew 26, verse 28, it says, that which is poured out for many for forgiveness of sins. They didn't say for the whole world now, did he? He said for many for the forgiveness of sins. I find that interesting. And by the way, this particular piece that he says here is, again, having the idea of he is forgiving us by, remember there's just 3 stages to forgiveness. He's going to loose us from our consequence of how the sin has made us feel. He's going to send away how he feels about us because we who have caused that sin against him, and he's going to also extend a gracious hand, be willing to reconcile with us. That's pretty awesome of Jesus. While we're yet enemies, he loved us. Verse 29, but I tell you that I will not henceforth drink of this product of the vine till that day which I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. Now many would say here, well, what is that? Is it wine? Is it grape juice? Well, I don't think it's wine because wine is fermented. I'm not saying wine is the devil. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that fermentation is a type of sin. And this particular feast of Passover is about having no fermentation, no leaven. So therefore this was unfermented grape juice. You cannot have leavened bread. You cannot have fermented wine. That speaks to sin entering in, and that's not going to be a part of the pure, unblemished body and blood of Jesus. That's, symbolism is awry with that. That's why I don't like when the Catholics do that, by the way. They put wine in the chalice. I'm like, no, don't do that. And then it says in verse 30, this is where it gets interesting. By the way, that's how he says, I won't drink it again with you until it's in my Father's kingdom. Not his kingdom, which again is another clue to you that you inherit the kingdom of God on earth. You enter the kingdom of the heavens in the heavenly sphere. This is why Jesus said, the last shall be first. The last to inherit are the ones in the heavens, but then when they do, they'll be first. That's why Jesus said in chapter 26 of Matthew, verse 29, you won't see me drink it again with you anew until in my Father's kingdom, which is after his millennial reign, after his kingdom. Interesting, isn't it? Because that's when we inherit. That's when the bride and the bridegroom come together. Another interesting tell of those who don't understand the dynamic between that 1,000-year reign followed by another day of God, 1,000 years. Then verse 30, typical Jesus fashion, does things that don't make any sense for humans, but he does things that are just profound to me. He's about to die, 6 hours left roughly to his life before he gets betrayed, and he sings songs in verse 30. Having sung, they departed the Mount of Olives. Are you kidding me? He's just been betrayed. He's about to be betrayed, and all of a sudden he's about to again be at the garden, and it's just, and he does that. Verse 31. Then Jesus says to them, "You will all stumble on my account, all of you, this night. For it is written, I will smite the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be dispersed." Verse 32, Matthew 26. "But after I am raised, I will precede you to Galilee." So he told them at the beginning of this chapter, in verse 3, I'm going to be crucified 2 days before Passover. 2 days before it happened, he tells them I'm going to be crucified. They forgot about that? And then he also says, I'm going to precede you to Galilee after I'm raised. Like, can you give me more clip notes to pass the test? And we still failed it. So for those who go, if I only knew, you did know, and they still failed. And these are the best of us, just so we're clear on this. Men and women alike, they both fell short. Men more so, sadly. Verse 33, and Peter answering said to them, if all should stumble with respect to you, I will never be made to stumble. Really, Peter? And this is in the ongoing tense. Ironically, he just did that very thing. He just didn't stumble once. He denied him 3 times, remember? And indeed, Jesus said to him, I say to you that this night before the cock crow, you'll thrice disown me. People think that's, again, a rooster crowing. You always see it in the movies that way. Not true. It's a ram's horn. It went real long. And then he would say, I don't know the man. Then it would happen again, and he would do it again, and that's really sad. So then Peter in verse 35 says to him, though doomed to die with you, I will not disown you. And all disciples said the same. You see,
Ignorance likes company, doesn't it? People always say something is because somebody's a boisterous or a statesman or the one you look up to because he says it. You just parrot them and think, well, they can't be wrong. You couldn't be more wrong. God bless Peter's heart. He meant well, but he's wrong. But it says all disciples said the same because of his example, the center of influence. This goes back to Galatians 2 when Paul, to his face, had a spitting match because he was influencing Barnabas, a good friend of his, and he was mad at Peter because not what he was doing, being a hypocrite, because of that, how it influenced Barnabas, who he trained up for 3 years. And he was being influenced by Peter, saying, dude, I know what I taught him. And if you're influencing him to think about something different than I taught him as the truth, that just shows you, not that you're a better teacher than me, that you have a huge influence on people. They look up to you. Come on, that's what this is, verse 35 is supposed to show you. People like fathers, adult men, grandfathers, people in authority positions have a influence, and that's why all disciples did the same thing, because he led the way. Bad leadership quality, but it's okay. He admitted his faults later. Jesus helped him out with that. Verse 36, then Jesus to them at the place called Gethsemane, which means olive press, and when you press olives, they turn dark red. Interesting enough, that's what Gethsemane means. And he sweat as clots of blood, which is dark red. What a coincidence. And said to the disciples, remain here while I go there and pray. It's the first time he says that. And taking with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, which is James and John, he began to be filled with sorrow and anguish, which is, sorrow is in the ongoing tense. That means he was continuously in a saddened state. So it's interestingly conflicting with Hebrews chapter 12, for the joy set before me endured the cross. So people who say, how can a woman be happy and yet be in pain giving labor? Only women who've done that can speak to that, can't you? You can be both. You can be in labor pains but yet be joyful that you're giving birth to a newborn baby boy or girl, right? Here's Jesus saying, I'm joyful for what I'm about to do. Doesn't mean what I'm doing is happy times. They both can be true. People act like, how can you be joyful in Jesus and have a sad moment or be depressed in your life? Look at Matthew 26, verse 30-37. You explain to me how Jesus was sorrowful and filled with anguish, but Hebrews 12, he has the joy set before me and endured the cross. You tell me about that. So I'm just telling you, I don't make this book up. I'm just reading what it's telling me. Verse 38, then he says to them, my soul is surrounded with a deadly anguish. Stay here and watch with me. He expounds on this anguish by saying it's extremely sorrowful. It's really gut-wrenching. He's telling them. You can't be more specific. It's like someone giving you someone's giving you a lifeline and saying, I really need someone to talk to. And you just turn a deaf ear to them. I don't know about you, I've been there. So for the second time, he says in verse 39, and going forward a little while he fell on his face, supplicating and saying, oh my Father, if it possible, let this cup be removed from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will. Now later on he's going to describe this in the book of Luke later on about these, the Thelo and Thelema will. Thelo was God's executive will outside of time. Jesus and God the Father are the only ones who have an executive will. And then he's saying in time, which is Thelema, ma is the suffix as a result of having time. In time he's going to subject that will to the will of the Father outside of time where they agreed upon this whole plan. Going back to Romans 8, no one's his counselor. They decided this. Philippians 2, he never considered anything else but to submit to this. So when he says, let this cup be removed from me, not as I will, but as I will, in verse 39, he's not referring to the fact that he's thinking about recanting his decision. He's referring to the fact that it's an emotional, physical, draining process to give yourself over to the sin debt of man. Not just the sin debt, all of our sin debt. That's a lot of sin, bro. That's a lot. Bro, it's just a lot of sin. Mine alone sucks, let alone all of ours compounded upon him. From people past to people present and future, it's crazy. In verse 40, and he turned to the disciples, and he returned to the disciples and finds them. Now, the disciples, who are they? Just 3 of them. Not all 11 of them. Remember, Judas is already gone. There's only 11. And of the 11, only 3 he brought to say, hey, remain here and pray, Peter, James, and John. So he refers to those guys he returns to in verse 40, and he finds them sleeping. And says, Peter, is it so that thou could not keep awake with me for a single hour? Which means Jesus was praying for an hour. Peter and the rest of them were drained. Now, again, we talked about this before, but they came in Palm Sunday on an emotional high. He went through all the discourse for Monday and Tuesday, and he has this Paschal Lamb dinner the night before, and now they're going into this the next, and this is that night they're going into this. They're emotionally on all kinds of roller coasters, right? And so they have little sleep, They go outside to Bethany to rest. They come back to Jerusalem. It's about a 40-minute walk maximum, back and forth. So they're not. You're not sleeping long nights when you're in the midst of Hosanna Palm Sunday and the most profound prophetic teaching ever known to mankind. You're kind of like eyes wide open. Yeah, you're like this is go time. So they're all like wired, and I don't blame them because now it's late at night. It's approaching midnight, and they're falling asleep. I don't know about you, but I've been up this morning since 4:30. So it's a long day. And in some ways, I don't like it to be straight from my flesh, but other ways, I like it spiritually because it gives me a glimpse of appreciation what Jesus went through. It was a long, long day for him, and it started here. And the disciples are just human, and they couldn't stay awake for 1 hour. Verse 41, he says, watch and pray that you enter, it says, watch and pray, enter not into trial. Watch and pray. And the watching there is like keep close, strict guard of yourself. They couldn't do it. And Jesus knew it. And that's why he says in verse 41, the spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. Well, that's the trial. The trial is your spirit wants to do what you know you want to do, but your flesh won't let you. The flesh is too weak. It's too cumbersome. Too many shortcomings. In verse 42, a second time he says, he retires, supplicated, and oh my Father, if it cannot be that this be removed, if I must drink it, thy will be done. And that's where you see the word thelema, which aligns with Luke 22. We're going to get there. But it's on the left side of your margin. The will be done. There's the thelema word. There's the ma at the end of the suffix, showing the will in time. Because the ma is a suffix, means as a result of God's will in time. And returning, he finds them still sleeping. And it tells you in verse 43 what I'm saying. Their eyes overpowered them. They're just tired. You ever been there where you're trying to stay awake? You know, I don't know about you, but you get north of 50. People say, hey, what are you doing at New Year's Eve this year? And I said, we got 2 tickets to stay at home, baby. Because that's what we're going to be doing. We've been doing that for a while. Sometimes I don't even care to stay up to the thing. I don't care. I fall asleep and wake up and say, oh, it happened? Okay, that's good. so they're overpowered, their eyes. They're just tired. In verse 44, again leaving them, he went and prayed a third time, using again the same words. So remember, Jesus said, do not repeat yourself as the Pharisees do and do vain prayers, repetitious prayers. But in verse 44, he says, he prayed a third time, using again the same words. So he doesn't mean words themselves being repeated are bad. It's the intent of one's heart. He's not repeating it with the same old. Like when we do communion once a month, we say the same things. We read the same verses. We're doing this now every year on Wednesday. But it's what it means to you, right? So that's what he's talking about. So the words themselves being repeated, just like he did with festivals and feast days, he said repeat the same thing year after year, right? Repetition and traditions aren't bad. It's the intent behind them and the merit you bring to what they mean. And you can tell Jesus was never just mailing it in. It was sincerely heart-wrenching for him. In verse 45, that's what he was showing them. Even though you may be asking God for the same thing, have that genuineness and that brokenness of your spirit, mental state of mind be out there. Verse 45, he then comes to the disciples and says to them, do you sleep now and take your rest? For behold, the hour has arrived, or is arrived, that the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. And delivered up, again, is in the plural tense, showing you he's going to be delivered up constantly through this night. Not just by Judas tonight, but by the Jewish guard. And from the Jewish guard to the different high priests, to the Sanhedrin, and from there to the Romans, from Pilate to Herod the Pilate. He's letting you know this is going to be I'm going to be tossed around a lot tonight. He's saying that word delivered in the ongoing tense. He's letting them know this is the beginning of worse to come, and I'm quite aware of it. They had no idea. The worst was yet to come. In verse 46, arise, let us go. Behold, he who betrays me has come. Now while Jesus was speaking, Judas, behold, one of the 12, accompanied with a great crowd, armed with swords and clubs, from the high priest and elders of the people. It wasn't the Roman guard, it was a Jewish guard. Armed with swords and clubs. Never once did Jesus walk around with a sword in his hand. I'm not saying he didn't bear arms, if you will. It wasn't about that. So why are you bringing swords and clubs? Are you serious? It's crazy. And then in verse 48, and he who delivered him up had given them a sign, saying, he it is whom I may kiss, hold him fast. Now, people say, why did he kiss him? Well, in Psalm 55, Ahithophel and David, the second self, he calls him, and he betrays him at midnight, and they were good friends. When he found out he hung himself, they're both from Kirioth. Interesting about him and Judas. And David said, if anybody else betrayed me, it'd be one thing, but it was my second self, is the phrasing in the Hebrew, meaning a real dear friend. That's the reason why this is fulfilling that typology of David's close friend. Ahithophel, Christ is a fulfillment of David. His close friend Judas is betraying him. That's why it cuts deep. He wasn't an enemy. He was a friend. He was a follower, believer. And by the way, extracurricular of church history says that James of Alphaeus, the less, had a semblance to Jesus. That they say his face and his body build and his hair had sometimes from a distance or at night, it would be confusing to see who's who. So they would claim James of Alphaeus would walk around with his hair in his face. He didn't want to look up, and he had his hair kind of covering, kind of longer. He didn't want to ever be mistaken for Jesus. He didn't want that to happen like ever. So, interesting enough, there's two reasons why he would have kissed him. For the confusion of knowing who's James of Alphaeus versus who's Jesus, then also the fulfillment, more importantly, of Scripture itself, the symbolism of David and Ahithophel. So in verse 49, immediately approaching Jesus, he said, "Hail, Rabbi," and repeatedly kissed him. Not just once, but repeatedly. That's different than just the one kiss you see in these betrayal movies of the Roman Empire when Brutus does that to Caesar. This is repeatedly, which is more hypocritical, you know? It's like, why the repeatedness of it, the repetitiousness of it? It's very telling. But Jesus said to him, "Companion, for what purpose are you present?" Companion, it's a lower level for friend. Not an endearing friend, but a friend nonetheless. Like we all have friends that we say, "That's my friend." But you wouldn't share, like, that's your first phone call when you get bad news from the hospital, right? That's not your first phone call. Maybe it's your second, third, right? So maybe it's your fourth, fifth. So we have friends that are wider circle and friends in a closer circle. The word he uses here for friend is a wider circle. So he's bringing up the fact that Judas, you're my friend, but let's get real here. You were always kind of like, always looking to see what I could do for you, and you weren't really relenting to what I was telling you. That's kind of what he was telling him by saying to him, "You're my friend, but you kind of out here in the peripheral. I knew you would never be there to help me move when moving time came." Like those kind of friends. I've been there. So he says, then coming, they laid hands on Jesus and they secured him, which means they seized him is the word there. They actually grabbed him pretty hard, and again they had swords and clubs. They weren't nice about this. They were like pretty assertive. That's the image here. In verse 51, Mel Gibson does a good job of this in the movie The Passion, showing the disgusting nature of this. And behold, one of those who was with him, laying his hand on his sword, drew it, striking the servant of the high priest, cut off his ear. Now we know later on from John that's Malchus, and that's Peter who did that. And Jesus just touched him. Whoa! The ear grows back. Another wow moment. Then in verse 52, Jesus says to him, "Return your sword to its place." By the way, stop there. Wait a minute. How do you even have a sword? So that means Jesus is okay with being armed, wasn't he? He was okay with it. It's just not the proper application. He mentioned, you don't need to have that stuff, but when I'm not here, you're going to need to have that stuff. But by the way, when you have that stuff, just remember, who lives by the sword dies by the sword. So make sure when you pull that's going to happen. And it could be your own as well. Even if it's not, you got to live with the life you took or maimed. So he didn't say he's bad. He just said it's safety first, and understand the accountability and responsibility that's in your hand. So when he drew this and struck his ear off, Peter's like acting in anger and emotion, and Jesus is telling him in verse 52, "Return your sword to its place, for all have recourse. All who have recourse to the sword shall perish by the sword." Meaning, your assertiveness, when you're doing this, you're relying on this to solve the problem. That's your last recourse, not your first. And that's why he said to him, your first reaction was to go for violence or for assertiveness. Your first reaction should be to seek peace. Then you get assertive if that doesn't work. Verse 53, "Or dost thou think that I cannot entreat my Father, or he will send to my relief more than 12 legions of angels?" Again, making Peter realize, do you think anything you can do can outdo what I can do myself? Are you kidding me right now? Not to mention physical force is nothing compared to the spiritual power God has at his fingertips. 12 legions of angels. Legions, as in legions are tens of thousands. So that's like hundreds of thousands of angels. One of them could kick booty, let alone 120,000. They could wipe out the entire human race. Don't forget, by the way, 12 legions is a big deal, because the 4 angels in the river Euphrates in Revelation 9 kill a third of men. What? 4. 4 angels kill a third of men in Revelation 9. Just 4. 4. And he's got hundreds of thousands at his beck and call saying, "You think I'm worried about these guys? Are you serious?" I could do it if I wanted to. If I didn't want to lift the finger, I just go, you guys get him. And you're going to bring a sword out as if you're doing some kind of benefit to me? That's silly. So in verse 54, but in that case, how could the scripture be verified? That thus it must be. Jesus is telling him, but I'm not going to do that because then I wouldn't be able to fulfill what I came here to do. This is what you're not understanding. Jesus at that same time, verse 55, said to the crowds, as in pursuit of a robber, have you come with swords and clubs to take me? Interesting, he was crucified between two robbers. Same word. And you're treating him as if the people you're going to crucify him with, it's a play on words as if to say, you know I'm not guilty of anything, but I know in advance you're going to charge me with the crime and insult me by having me go up to the Golgotha with these guys flanking me, as if to smear me, as if I'm one of them. Isn't that crazy? He knew this. He already knew that before they even did that, and before Pontius Pilate was going to have two robbers sent with him, and he's giving them a little tell, as if to say, oh, I know I'm God. I know you're going to put me between two robbers on the way to Golgotha as you mock and laugh and kill me. I just want you to know that I've done nothing to be associated with a robber, but you're treating me like one. But don't think I'm not lost on me that you're going to try to fulfill this later on, not realizing that Pontius Pilate and the Romans are going to also associate me with robbers, all because of you. He tells them in verse 55, I sat teaching in the temple every day, and you did not arrest me. All this, however, was been done that the writing of the prophet be verified. Then all his disciples deserting him, they just left, man. Left. They fled. Oh, man. And those apprehending Jesus conducted him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were assembled. But Peter followed him at a distance. Now remember, later on, you're going to see in John that Judas and Peter were the only two that saw the whole thing happen. Peter and Judas were the only two who saw him go through the trials of the Sanhedrin. And they saw him get punched and smacked. They had to watch that. Judas, who betrayed him, to say, I'll make a little something on this deal, but not to get him to die, to force him to be king. And he's having to see that backfired badly. And Peter, likewise, is seeing how his master, the way he put everything, all his stock in him, is just going down fast. He's not doing anything to stand up for himself. He's just aghast. So in verse 58, Peter followed him a distance to the palace because he was ashamed. He was afraid they'd arrest him too. Having entered, sat with the attendants to see the result. You see, he's kind of blended in. And that's how you know who your friends are, right? When the chips are stacked against you and the evidence looks bad. You ever seen those case file stuff with the true stories of a loved one gets killed and the loved one who's seeing that person is so overwhelmed with emotion they don't think, and they go to hug him, no, and they touch the knife or they touch the gun, and now they're the suspect. Like, come on, man, that's crazy. So verse 54, when you said, is that predestination? Absolutely, that's predestination. He's talking about when he said that if I did that, then it wouldn't be verified, right? He's pointing out his ordained will has to happen. That's why he's not doing that. It's all about God's ordained will. He's walking in it, just like we are. He himself is walking in his own ordained will to go through this. So in verse 59, he said, now the high priest and the whole Sanhedrin sought false testimony against Jesus so that they might deliver him to death. You see, we hear words like witch hunt. And did you know that back in the Salem's witch days, when a woman went through menopause and went through her hormonal imbalance stuff, they thought that was witchcraft. So you're being burned at the stake just for being a woman who went through a hormonal change, menopause, because men are too dumb to understand the different hormones. So you're going to burn them alive and call them a witch. Really? Because they crave different things, like when they're pregnant. They have different things they go through when they go through menopause. And because of that, you're going to kill them. So it's just interesting how, to me, it reminds me how men are so dumb, they're going to trump up any false testimony they want to get their hands on to have confirmation bias of an already preordained decision. We hate him, he's got to die, let's find evidence now to fulfill what we want to do. What? I thought you were innocent until you're guilty. No, not to them. You're already guilty, let's gin up some evidence here to use against them. That's what they were doing. It's just so, it's infuriating. So they wanted to kill him. Then in verse 60, they did not find it. They didn't find enough false evidence against him. They didn't find it, though many false witnesses came. But at last, two approaching, said, this man declared, I can destroy the temple of God and in 3 days rebuild it. Which, by the way, he said in John chapter 2 at the beginning of his ministry, which only 6 apostles heard it. James and John, Peter and Andrew, Philip and Nathanael. And some of these tribes of Pharisees heard it. And so here's the people that were there. These people, in other words, to say that means you were there all the way back from the beginning. You saw it all, man. And you're there to try to be used They were probably paying him, obviously, right, just to say that. And verse 62, and the high priest answered, he said to them, answer thou nothing to what these testify against you? Questioning Jesus. But Jesus was silent. And the high priest said to him, I adjure thee by the living God, which is himself, that you inform us whether you are the Messiah, the Son of God. Jesus said to him, thou hast said. Moreover, I declare to you, hereafter you shall see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest rent his clothes, saying, he has spoken blasphemy. What further need have we of witnesses? Behold, now you have heard the blasphemy. No, what you heard was a fulfillment, and you're not supposed to rip your robes no matter what happens, so you're the one committing blasphemy. You can't do that. That's not your robe to rip, first of all. What an arrogant, pious jerk. To rip his robe, you don't ever do that. There's no Old Testament passage that says, hey, if a guy comes to you and says he's God and he's not, you can rip your robe. It never says that. You deal with him in a certain way. But you don't rip the garment that God says is supposed to be sanctified and set apart. No, you do not do that. And so he was violating the law by charging, it's hypocrisy at its best. Let's gin up some crime against him to validate what we already want to do, kill him. Now let's charge him of breaking the law as we break the law to charge him with the fact that he's breaking the law. What? You're breaking the law while you're charging him with breaking the law. It's insane to me. And then Jesus, in verse 64, tells them something that's very profound, because people think this is the second coming of Jesus. No, it's not. That's not what this is. This is the day of tribulation he's going to throw down on them. He said, you won't see me again. I declare to you hereafter, you won't see me. You shall see the Son of Man. You'll see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. Just like it said in the book of Acts. This same Jesus you see go will come again in like manner. And he went up in the clouds. He'll come back in the clouds. That's end tribulation. That's Armageddon. And you don't want to be in front of him because you die. You're behind him, you live. You're in front of him, you die. And yeah, the only people that get spared from that are the 144,000 in Petra that are in front of him. And he tells them the wounds he sees. They go, where'd you get those? On the house of my friends. And they're like, what? Yeah. And then one day they could convert it. That's what he's talking about in verse 64. The next time you'll see me, you'll have millions dead and 0.001% of you left alive. Any questions? They're like, yeah, several questions. You mean all of us are going to be suffering the consequence of this sin today? That's correct. The masses of you will die. That's what he's basically telling. That is horrific. That's a Holocaust beyond proportions. Because remember, the Antichrist, when he comes to be the beast, he's going to murder about probably 6 to 8 million Jews in about 30 days. That dwarfs anything Hitler could ever accomplish in his lifetime. But that's nothing. So Hitler did 6 million and years. He's going to do more than that in less than a month, about a month. That is insane. A lot of body count. Jesus is mentioning that basically without saying it. That verse is pregnant in meaning in verse 64. About their consequence, about the future, and about his second coming. So in verse 66, Matthew 26, what is your opinion? And they answering said, he deserves to die. Then they spat in his face. And they beat him with their fist. And some struck him on the cheek with the open hand. And I don't know if you've ever been hit before. I've been hit by my dad a lot growing up. That hurts more than you think. People think a fist hurts more than an open hand. I don't know, man. They both really hurt, depending how strong you are and how big your doggone hand is. And back then, they weren't girly men. They worked labor. So it means your hand would probably be calloused, probably a little thick, a little leathery, and that hurts a lot. A lot. And they had an open hand. They punched him in the face, he spit, and they punched him, and they smacked him with an open hand on the face. And it says, and they struck him, which means really hard, on the face. And it's saying, divine to us, O Messiah, who is striking you? And this brings me back, this brings me back to memories when I was a kid in front of my mom. My dad would sit me in a chair, and my mom would accuse me of things I never did, and she'd make up lies, and she would smirk and sneer, and you deserve to get hit. And I said, I didn't say that. And my dad would just go, BAM! Like that, real freaking hard. And I was like, I get mad, and I wanted to cry. Don't you cry! BAM! Stop it! And he said, don't you say that! BAM! And I just think about this. And I just was filled with rage. I wanted to kill them. I wanted to just die. And here's Jesus, just cool as a cucumber. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. I've been through something like this when someone is subjecting you to unjust punishment, and it's not normal to remain calm. It is not normal. And here he is, completely calm. I just can't get over it. And then in verse 69, Peter sat without in the courtyard, And a maidservant came to him saying, you were with Jesus, the Galilean. In verse 70, he denied it before them all, saying, I know not what you say. Then verse 71, and passing into the portico, another saw him and says to them, this person was also there with Jesus the Nazarite. So first he's a Galilean, then he's a Nazarite. They're describing Jesus. And Peter, listens to verse 72, and again he denies him, but with an oath this time. Like, I promise you, I don't know the man. I know not the man. So first he just says, I don't know him. Now he's saying, I promise you I don't know him. That's what it means with an oath. He's doubling down on the denial. Verse 73, after a while, those who stood by approaching said to Peter, certainly thou art one of them, for even the dialect makes thee known, meaning the way in which you talk. Like you're from Boston, the haba and the ka. You're with the guys from Boston, right? So it is verse 74 that he began to curse and to swear, I know not the man, and instantly a cock crew. Do you see how it got worse? I don't know him. Then he goes, I promise you I don't know him. Then he cusses and swears, I don't know him. Whoa, relax. He got worse and worse. So people don't realize that. They'll go, Peter just went, I don't know. I don't know. That's not how it went. He got worse with the denial. Worse. Just like all of us. When sin gets a hold of you, it doesn't let go. And things get worse. It gets its foothold in you. It gets its tentacles in you. And they got sharp tentacles. And they take you down hard. And you get worse and worse. And it just, oh my gosh. It just spirals out of control for him. And instantly, he hears that horn go off, that shofar horn. And Peter recollected the declaration of Jesus that before the cock crows, you will thrice deny me. And going out, he wept bitterly, as in extremely hurtful to his heart, brokenhearted. Now at dawn, at the dawn of day, all the high priests and the elders of the people held a council against Jesus in order to deliver him to death. And binding him, they led and delivered him up to Pilate, the governor. Then that Judas, who delivered him up, perceiving that he was condemned, repented. I tell this people all the time. You should survey people that know Jesus, by the way, and ask them, hey, you know Judas repented? They'll go, no, he didn't. You don't read Matthew 27? It says it right there. They know he did. That doesn't say that. Yeah, it does. It means he turned from his sin. He metamelamai. He turned from his sin. He didn't turn to God, metanoia, I'll give you that. He metamelanai, turned from his sin. What he didn't do is the second part, which is turn to God and trust him to forgive him of that sin. He turned from doing it and said, oh my gosh, I acknowledge that was wrong. I ain't doing that. I'm not going to try to fit God to my will. But he didn't turn to God to forgive him or restore him. That was his problem. That's the second part of repentance. Turn from sin, but then after that, turn to God. And so they don't see that. People in Christianity don't know he repented. In verse 3, Matthew 27, and he returned 30 shekels to the high priest and the elders, saying, I have sinned. Watch what he says. And betraying innocent blood. Well, how would he know that? Unless he believed Jesus was the Messiah. Because of course he did. But they said, what is that to us? That will see to that. Holding the shekels in the temple, he withdrew, and having gone away, he strangled himself. He strangled himself. And then, by the way, in the book of Acts, it says that when he came forward, his bowels burst forth. And that makes no kind of sense. Because you can't strangle yourself and then all of a sudden your bowels just open up. That doesn't make sense. I personally think, and I only say this because I had a brother-in-law who took his life. And I could tell you that he tried once and didn't succeed with carbon monoxide poisoning. Then the second time he put a gun to his mouth and shot his brains out. Because when you don't succeed the first time, you go more extreme second time. So I think that Judas was trying to make sure he died. So I think that in case the branch broke or whatever that was, any kind of a slight pressure downward, it wouldn't just maybe for a while and then break. He wanted to make sure any kind of jerk like that, I think he cut himself and he kind of speaking to the physical gutting that spoke to the spiritual gutting he was feeling. I think that doesn't say that, but I sure think that based on the book of Acts, which says his entrails popped out. That's pretty gross. But hurling the shekels in the temple, he withdrew, and having gone away, strangled himself. Verse 6, the high priest, taking the money, said, it is not lawful to put this in the korbanon, seeing it as the price of blood. And taking counsel, they bought with it the potter's field as a burial place for strangers. Therefore, that field is called the field of blood even to this day. When there was verified the word spoken through Jeremiah the prophet, saying, I took 30 shekels, the price of which they valued the precious one, from the sons of Israel, and gave them for the potter's field, even as the Lord directed me. That is such an ironic place of a name for a field.
the potter of the clay, and the clay was Judas, refused to be molded by the will of God, and because of it, he killed himself, and the field became known as a potter's field. It's kind of ironic, isn't it? He wasn't willing to be molded by the potter himself to do his will. He wanted to mold the potter himself. No, you're the clay, brother. We get molded. We don't do the molding. He was trying to mold Jesus into what he wanted him to do, to kick the Sanhedrin's butt, to throw over the Romans. It didn't work out well, and now he became the antithesis of what he was trying to do. You're supposed to be the clay. He's the potter, and now you're in a field called the potter's field. As if to remind everybody, my job's to mold you, and now look at you. Now you're molded and etched in history as it better if you never had been born, because you were the son of perdition. You forsook the one you loved, all because you wanted to mold God to your image and letting him mold you to his. In verse 11, Jesus stood before the governor. I feel sorry for Judas, by the way. He did believe in Jesus. He's saved. Jesus stood before the governor, and he asked him, saying, "Art thou the king of the Jews?" And Jesus replied, "Thou sayest." Just two-word answer. Verse 12, but he made no reply to the accusations of the high priest and the elders. Interesting how he didn't make no reply to his own kindred, but to the Romans. Sure, here you go. Yeah, you say it. In verse 13, Pilate says to him, "Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?" And he gave him no answer, not even one word, so that the governor was greatly surprised. And at each feast the governor was accustomed to release to the crowd one prisoner, whom they wished. And then they had a well-known prisoner named Barabbas. Therefore, being assembled, Pilate said to them, "Which do you wish that I release to you, Barabbas, or that Jesus who is named Christ?" For he knew not that they had delivered him up through envy. See, it tells you right there. They were envious of him. Because when someone comes in and changes the bell curve in class, when you're getting 60s, and now the teacher said everybody's getting a 60, fine. Your 65 is now an A. Okay, Jesus comes in, he's getting hundreds. Well, the bell curve has changed. You don't like that. When you're the guys who are getting the A's at 65, now you're getting your D's. You are failing the class altogether. You don't like this smarty kid. So Jesus came in there and changed everything. The law of Moses, out the window. The whole Sanhedrin influence, out the window. The other 4 chief rabbis, out the window. He's just the new sheriff in town. They did not like it. They envied him. It tells you this in verse 18. And even Pilate, one who's not engaged in religious activities, but engaged in overseeing the province, in verse 18, for he knew that they had delivered him up through envy. He knew it. And it was obvious to him. And while he was sitting on the tribunal, by the way, bimatos, same exact word used in 1 Corinthians about we all must appear for the bema seat of Christ. Same word. So for those who want to tell you, hey, it's a reward and ceremony of reviewing and ceremony, it's a joyous time. It's a joyous word. Does it look joyous to you at this point? Does it look like Jesus in a joyous moment being reviewed and rewarded? No, don't lie to yourself. It's a judgment word. It means judgment, tribunal, bimatos. They're trying to twist it because they don't want to understand that we are accountable because Jesus loves us. Not less accountable, more accountable. His wife sent to him, Pilate's wife, saying, have nothing to do with that just person. For I have suffered much this day in a dream because of him. So God told her. There's no way she knew that. God told her that he's a righteous man. Don't. And she told Pilate, you want to get out of it. And God's just showing in his sovereign hand, people are cowards. Pilate had the power and the ability to say no, but he was too cowardice to stand to the people. And so in verse 20, the high priest and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to destroy Jesus, or to, again, want to apoleia, utterly make him perish. So they wanted him to suffer badly. And so, interesting that the high priest and the elders persuaded the crowds, because they knew, left to their own devices, they wouldn't cheer for no Barabbas. He's a murderer. So they had to kind of stoke the crowd. Hey, say this. So people, this isn't new today. We get these people today that are paid antagonizers, paid protesters. This started back then. This isn't a new thing to us. Solomon said nothing new under the sun. They were basically agitating the crowd to do what they wanted. And so in verse 21, the governor answering said to them, which of the two do you wish me to release to you? And they said, Barabbas. Pilate says to them, what then should I do to that Jesus who is named Christ, which means Messiah? They all say, let him be crucified. Oh my God. He said, no. For what evil? And this word evil is kakos. This means like an inner intrinsic evil. Pilate's saying, I see nothing about this man that would speak to some intrinsic evil. Barabbas, I see it. He's a murderer. This man, no. He says, what evil has he done? What intrinsic thing is he so evil?
And they vehemently cried, saying, "Let him be crucified." But you're not answering the question. You're just repeating yourself. And then for verse 24, Pilate, perceiving that he had no influence, but rather a tumult was made, taking water, washed his hands. This is his coward move. Instead of asserting himself, he was afraid. Because remember, back in the day, if you lose control of your province and you're under Caesar, that's your head. He kills you and your wife and your kids and your family. They don't play around. Either keep the peace in the province in my Roman Empire, or you die. So he's like, I can't control these people. I gotta appease them. So instead of using tough love, he just cowered into it. You know, it's like when you are a substitute teacher, or you're a stepdad, or you're filling in for, like, as an uncle for somebody's a child and they're not being raised right, and you got to be the one disciplining them. That's a tough gig. That's tough. I get it. It's hard. But what's happening is that Pilate had the ability to do the right thing, and he just gave in to the pressure of the easy way out. He took the easy road. I get it. It's easier to do that. It's harder to put your foot down and do the right thing. I get it. You still should have done it, though. Doesn't give you an excuse. I get it, but you're still wrong. So what's he do? Tries to make the middle of the road and says, well, I'm going to give in to the pressure, but I'm going to make it clear that I don't agree with it. I'm going to get some water, wash my hands, and say to the crowd, I'm innocent of this blood. See you to it. Oh, that's okay. Then the people said, which Mel Gibson put in the Passion. Watch the movie again, The Passion. You will see he took it out in English, in translation at the bottom of the screen, but they will say this verse 25. And all the people answering said, his blood rests on us and on our children. That line is in the movie of The Passion in the Aramaic. You hear them say it, but there's no translation. So Mel Gibson said, I get your little pushback. I'm going to compromise with you. I'm going to leave it in the movie. I'm going to leave that line non-translated, but everybody's going to hear it. And if they go back and read it, they're going to know I left it in. Haha. So he left it in, but still had some slack. But those who know, like me, you can say they still said it. He had it in the actual filming of The Passion to show that this is part of what they said. That's how hatred they had this much hatred for Jesus. They were willing to let his blood rest on us and on our children. I remember talking to a Jewish friend of mine once, and no offense, but I told him about that. He got lividly mad, angry so much, ripped his shirt, punched the door, was vehemently, visibly angry. Did not want to hear about this verse. I go, I'm just telling you that the Jews back in the day said, let his blood be on us. They were saying, like, bring on the guilt and the consequence, and on our children. That's damning, man. So, and he said, they did not. I go, that's what they said. So, and he goes, are you saying that's why we've been having this struggles our whole life? Through the scattering and through the Holocaust? You read Deuteronomy 28. Go back and read Deuteronomy 28. Read it again and watch how God says to you, you don't obey me, I'm going to break it off in your hind parts. I'm going to scatter you. I'm going to make you slaves to people. I'm going to make them exploit you. Read it. Don't believe me. Read Deuteronomy 28. Read it sometime. Read it. It's not funny. It's very severe. And here they are doing the very thing they know not to do. God has trained them to the law of Moses. If you obey me, you get blessed. You disobey me, you get consequences. And here they're saying, bring them on. Bring on the consequences, what they're saying. Not only on us, but on our kids. That's really brash. Very brazen. Verse 26, he then released to them Barabbas, but he had scourged Jesus. Scourged, as in he whipped him and delivered him up to be crucified. Then the soldiers of the governor, having led Jesus into the praetorium, gathered together against him the whole company. And by the way, there's a couple of coats involved here. There's a red coat and a white coat and a purple coat. So Pilate actually scourges him, and then it's never enough. And then they go back, and we're going to get to that in other gospel accounts. But in verse 28, on clothing him, they put on him a soldier's scarlet cloak, and a wreathing crown of acanthus. They placed it on his head, put a reed in his right hand, and kneeling before him, they mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews. So this is the first time the Romans brought him pain. The Jews spit on him, punched him, and smacked him, right, in the face, and then mocked him with, who hit you? And then here, the Romans, they're no different. They're same evil. They don't care if you're a Jew or a Gentile. The Jews aren't exempt. Gentiles just as evil. They go here, put a crown of thorn on his head, mock him with the scarlet robe of a soldier, and they put a reed in his hand, which is like a little, flexible thing. And then go, hey, here's your little sceptered king. Hail. They're mocking him and putting a crown of thorns into his head, which hurts. And they, verse 30, spit on him took the reed and struck him in the head. That reminds me when I was in high school. Soaking wet, 105, 135, in that range. People would say, why hit yourself? Why hit yourself? That's what they're doing. They are taking the reed, he's already spent, and they're just hitting him in the head. Just making fun. Just piling on. Bullying him, basically. Verse 31. And when they had insulted him, they divested him of the soldier's cloak, and cloaked him with his own raiment, and led him away to be crucified. Now, if you know anything about the fact that he was scourged, and there's sores, there's blood, you can't put a garment on, which then sticks to you and adheres to you, and then rip it off and not re-aggravate those wounds. It hurts. That's what they just did. You don't catch that when you read, no. They put the coat, they already scourged him, put a coat on him, which means it sucked into the blood, right, onto the coat. Then it sat there for a little while as they mocked him and spit on him with the reed in his head. Then they ripped the coat off of him again. That hurts. They're evil, man. Verse 32, and going out they met a Syrian, which is in the Horn of Africa, which means a black man, named Simon, having compelled to carry his cross. I love how back in the day, black people and women were discarded to the two people that Jesus highlights in his crucifixion message. I think it's pretty. In Luke he says, pray, don't weep for me, weep for the women. And then here he talks about Simon the Cyrene. Why of all the people, why not choose a Roman? Why not choose a Jew? But he chose a black guy from Africa. Are you serious right now? It's just amazing to me how Jesus uses what we in society then and now kind of look down on. He championed on this most important moment of his life. It's just amazing to me. 6 women there at the cross. First one's there at the grave. Men scattered like a bunch of chickens. Only John was there with him as an apostle. But 6 women were there faithfully. And here you have Simon the Cyrene. Not a Jew, not a Roman, just some guy from Africa, the Horns, where he's from. And he's up carrying his cross. Verse 33, having arrived at the place called Golgotha, which is called the place of the skull, they gave him wine to drink mixed with gall, which having tasted, he would not drink. And after nailing him to the cross, they distributed his garments by lot, because they're disgusting people. And sitting down, they watched him there. And over his head they placed the accusation in writing, this is Jesus, the King of the Jews. And at that time, two robbers were crucified with him, one at his right hand and the other at his left. Now those passing by reviled him, shaking their heads, and saying, destroyer of the temple and builder of it, in 3 days, save yourself. If thou art the Son of God, come down from the cross. In like manner also the high priest with the scribes and the elders deriding, which means they were just in a nasty tone saying, he saved others, himself he cannot save. Is he the King of Israel? Let him now descend from the cross, and we will believe on him. It's so disrespectful. Just evil. Verse 43, he confided in God, let him rescue now if he delights in him. For he said, I am God's son. Just 100% mockery all the way through 39 and verse 43. Verse 44, those robbers also who were crucified with him reproached him, which means they reviled him and they were disgustingly gritting their teeth. But you're going to tell me in an hour of the time they were leading up with him, that's one of them just changed his mind. Based on what? Think about that. How could you be that vehemently against him, and then 1 hour later, you're a different man? What happened? Because it wasn't the same man. That's why. It was another guy. So in verse 45, from the 6th hour, there was darkness on the land till the 9th hour, which means from 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock. Darkness. 9th hour, Jesus exclaimed with a loud voice, Eli, Eli, sabachthani. That is my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Some of those standing there, hearing him, said, he calls for Elijah. And immediately one of them ran, and taking a sponge, filled it with vinegar, and putting it on a reed, gave him to drink. Others said, let him alone, let us see whether Elijah will come to save him. Then Jesus, crying out again with a loud voice, expired. And behold, the veil of the temple was rent in two from top to bottom, and the earth trembled, and the rocks were rent, and the tombs were opened, and many bodies of the sleeping saints were raised, and coming forth from the tombs after his resurrection went into the holy city and appeared to many. That's a lot of stuff you just read there. The fact that things went dark, that's the plague prior to the death of the firstborn. That's interesting. There was darkness, then there was death. That's similitude exactly. Oh, and by the way, You just rent the temple from top to bottom, which now gives me access to the holy. Are you saying that you're the, yeah, that's right, he's the mediator. And now you're telling me at the same time, you're telling me that these people rose up from the grave when he rose up and walked around the city. It says many of the body's sleeping saints, verse 52. Doesn't tell you, it doesn't say all of them. So which sleeping saints rose up exactly? I mean, I don't know. But you imagine seeing Esther and Abraham and Solomon and Eve and Noah and Rachel just walking around. It's unbelievable, man. I used to and Hannah walking around, Samuel. I'm like, are you for real right now? And they're like, are you? Yeah, they're talking about Jesus. That's insane to me. And people don't know about this, and you show them that they go, it's been about my whole life. I didn't know it was even there. Most folks have no idea about that verse 52 and 53. They have no idea that after his resurrection, many folks went to the holy city and testified of him. That's pretty awesome. Because all you get from atheist people or the prognosticator people say, well, then if he rose from the dead, God would make a bigger deal of it. Yeah, well, raising others from the dead to testify about you, kind of a big deal. You might have missed that part. And people do miss it. They miss the part where Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, he appeared to 500 people. 500. Who's that? I don't know who that is, by the way, if you're wondering. If you're wondering, ask me. I don't know. I know one thing. The 70 are the people from Luke 10, 70 disciples. There's the 12, 11 plus Paul, that's 82. Then there's 6 women at the cross, that's 88. And there's Joseph, Arimathea, and Nicodemus, that's 90. That's all I got. I got 90 that I know for sure were there at the upper room. But where's the other 30 come from, the upper room, let alone 500? Dude, that's a lot of people that he appeared to. And people say, he didn't make a big deal of it. That's kind of a big deal. They think it's just 12 apostles. Most folks you talk to have no idea he appeared to more than the 12 apostles. And they have no idea that after he rose from the dead, many other people went from the dead also around the city testifying of him. Both of those two things elude them. They go, 500? Yes! 1 Corinthians 15 says so. And by the way, here it says, other folks rose from the dead as well. What? Yes. They go, well, that's kind of a big deal. Yeah, it wasn't some secret resurrection. It was a big deal. In verse 54, now the centurion and those with him watching Jesus, seeing the earthquake and the events occurring, were greatly afraid, saying this was certainly the Son of God. Many women were there, just beholding at a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering to him. Among them were Mary of Magdala, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. There's 3 of the women. They're going to do 3 more in the book of John. And you're going to see Joanna as well, Joanna and Salome. And evening came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who was himself discipled to Jesus. You see, he was a believer. He was a student of Jesus. He just was a closet one. He wasn't really open about it because they would, again, put him out of the synagogue. We saw that before, and they don't like that. He going to Pilate, requested the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be given. And Joseph, taking his body, wrapped it in pure fine linen, and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had excavated in the rock. Having rolled a great stone to the door of the tomb, he departed. Now I have a question for you. If the Jewish idiom was to always cremate somebody, why would Jesus say, hey, don't worry about what she's using on 2 days before the Passover. She's embalming me, preparing me to be buried. Interesting. And now, Joseph, of Arimathea, a wealthy man, which means he has all means, whatever he wants to do, he just gives up his tomb. So why does he have a tomb? To be buried. If it was custom to be cremated, why are you buying a tomb, bro? It makes no sense. And then if that's just to put your ashes, then why are you taking Jesus' body and wrapping it up? That's your first action. And you can see the custom of the Jews to bodily bury people. People can see this, right? So, and you see this in verse 60, and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had excavated out of the rock, right? And he having rolled a great stone to the door of the tomb, he departed. That's a key verse there, by the way. He did what now? He put him in a new tomb, which had been excavated in the rock, and having rolled a great stone to the door of the tomb, he departed. By himself. He rolled a big old stone. That's a no. Okay, we just came back from Gatlinburg, and Ryan and I had a hard time lifting up a 350-pound part of a cement bench. That's nowhere near a big old stone. Okay, there's 2 stones of the tomb. Remember, there's an inner stone and an outer stone. Just to get you an idea, if you walk, imagine the people, we don't have a big congregation, right? But in bigger congregations, they have what they call a narthex in the sanctuary. So that the door to the building, as we get the narthex, there's another door to the sanctuary, right? Similar concept with the tomb. There's a big hole on the outside, and you would walk in. There's a place to sit down where you would pray, cry, reminisce, all that stuff. And then as you walk into the other doorway, that's where they lay the dead body. And he put a stone there. Okay? So there was an entrance. You could still sit down where that was sealed and pray and think about Jesus. And what Pilate and the Jewish people said was, I don't want them getting in there. I want to close the outer entrance. So, and to prove that, you're going to tell me that Joseph by himself moved a big rock, which took centurions to do together. Right. No, this was not a big stone. This was the inner stone. Okay? Verse 61 of Matthew 26. And Mary Magdalene was there, and the other Mary sitting opposite the tomb. Now on the morrow, which is after the preparation, the high priest and the Pharisees convened with Pilate, saying, Sir, we recollect that the impostor said, while living after 3 days, I will arise. Well, if he's a liar, what are you concerned? Who cares? And then they say, well, command therefore, in verse 63, the tomb be made secure till the third day. See? Let the tomb be made secure. And what do? And he says, disciples come and steal him, they say, to the people, he is raised from the dead. And so the last error would be worse than the first. Pilate said to them, you have a guard, go make it secure as you know how. And departing, they secured the tomb with the guard, having sealed the stone. Now, by the way, we're going to turn to Mark 14. As we turn there, I want you to think about the fact that people say, well, he's not real. If he's not real, then why not just, back in the time frame, if you were the Roman Empire and there's a tumult being raised, which Pilate already showed you, they don't want that. If he's in power and control and he kowtowed to the crowd, that shows you that they want peace no matter what. Okay. So that's a clear indicator, and the Jewish people clearly don't like Jesus at all. So if there's a whole uprising of people saying, he's alive! He rose up again from the dead. If it's all a lie, then go to the tomb and get the body. That's all you got to do, bro. If you're that close to the situation, well, and then you, by the way, you go on, well, they didn't do bones back then. They wrapped the body. That's the point. Get the cloth, get something with rigor mortis. Show me something. He's still dead, bro. That's all you got to do. And the uprising is squashed. Why didn't you do that? And they go, well, no, we don't know how they buried him back then. They didn't record it back then. That's not the point. If you were in power, which they were, Roman Empire, and the Jews were in control of the religious community, and they were, together they could easily both have the same interest in mind. They want peace in the city. And this uprising of being risen from the dead is causing a lot of stir. And they could have easily squashed it by saying, bring forth the rigor mortis. Bring forth the thumb of the finger or something. Nothing! So I find it disingenuous to sit here and tell me, oh, they hid his body. Yeah, right. You don't know how they buried back then. Because you can't bury a body that's no longer in the dead. He was buried for 3 days, and now his body's gone. So in Mark 14, verse 1, we're going to read again each account and fresh and new pick it up. Now Mark's talking about, again, from the Passover all the way through. Now after 2 days, verse 1 of chapter 14, it was Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Again, Passover 14th in the sun, leavened bread the 15th in the sun. High priest and the scribes saw how they might take him by deception and kill him. Why is it important to know about the 14th, 15th? Don't forget that the first day of Passover, the Mia day before that, they would actually prepare their lamb for sacrifice. They would actually present their lamb. That's the Mia day of Passover. Then the Protos day of Passover, which is the second day after that day. So the Mia day of Passover, present your lamb to be inspected. Then the actual Protos day, the first day of Passover, when Scripture says it that way, then that's also the Mia day of unleavened bread, because they were preparing for that being the next day, and the Protos day. So they overlap. So when you see Mia day of this or Protos day of that in the Greek, well, it doesn't make any sense because you don't understand. There's a day of preparation for each of them. So come on, man. So anyway, so that's why there's a Mia and a Protos of each day, and that's why Passover on the 14th, unleavened bread's on the 15th. But it says that the scribes thought they might take him by deception, which again shows you that they were deceiving Judas by deception. Who did they deceive? Judas. So that goes to show you that it wasn't an open conversation. They weren't on the same page like, we hate him, you do too, right? No. No, they hated him. Judas bought into their lies like, no, we want to see him be king too. Yeah, right, sure. Just like, remember Herod said, oh, where's the king? Let me know where he's at. I could also pay homage. Yeah, right, sure. Yeah, right. You want to kill him, jerk. So this is what they were doing. They were like, how Herod spoke to the wise men. Were the wise men evil? No. It's how the Sanhedrin spoke to Judas. They were deceiving him to act like, no, we're not going to kill him. We don't hate him. Okay. If they would have said to him, yeah, I want to turn him in, I want to kill him. He'd be, okay, there's a silver. That's not what happened. That's not what happened. He did not know they were trying to kill him. They were deceiving him and leaving that part out. They just want to question him, that's all. He's like, question him? He's going to show he's king, and he's going to assert himself. Sure, I'll help you do that. That was the lie. That's the deception. They had all along, just like, remember what they did with what is it, the guy, General Flynn? They entrapped him back in the day when the first election of Trump. But verse 2 of Mark 14, for they said, not during the feast, lest there be a tumult of the people. And being at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, while he was reclining at the table, a woman came having an alabaster box of balsam, genuine spikenard, very costly, and breaking the box, she poured it on his head. And some were displeased, saying among themselves, why was this a loss of balsam taking place? For this balsam could have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor, and they censured her. And Jesus said, let her alone. Why do you trouble this woman? She has done a good work for me. And remember, to another dovetail on this, did you know 300 denarii is basically an entire year's wage? Would? Yeah, it's like that. So you're telling me that's not a big deal? That's a big deal, man. So they aren't wealthy back. It's just like she had a year's wage that she just used to worship Jesus. Wow. It's crazy. And why did Matthew slip into that verse 52, 53? I think Matthew did that about those who rose up after Jesus died because he's the one who presents Jesus as a king. And so as 1 Corinthians says, the resurrection starts with him as the first fruit. And so Matthew wants to make sure we all know he was the first fruit and then others were raised after him. He's always about emphasizing Jesus as the king. So I think that may be the reason why he's doing that. And plus he presents him as king of the Jews, and therefore he wanted to represent the other Old Testament saints being raised. That's probably why he did that. I don't know that. That's my guess. So, but going back to Mark 14 and verse 8, possessing this balsam, she has done it to anoint my body beforehand for the burial. So again, 2 days before Passover, he tells them she's doing this for his burial. I mean, pay attention, man. This isn't but 2 days before. And indeed, I say to you, wherever these glad tidings may be proclaimed in the whole world, this also which she has done shall be spoken of in memory of her. So 2 days before Passover. Passover was today. It would be 6 p.m. yesterday till today. So 2 days before would have been, oh, that's Sunday night. As in Palm Sunday night. That's when this happened. Holy moly, dude. That's when this happened. It's crazy to me. So then you have, remember, before Palm Sunday, Mary anointed his feet, washed with her hair, but this is his head. This is different. So then you have in verse 10 of Mark 14, verse 10, and Judas Iscariot was one of the 12, went to the high priest to deliver him up. Hearing it, they rejoiced and promised to give him money. Give him money. So he wants to give over to them, and he wants to give them. They want to give him money. He sought how he might conveniently deliver him up. Now on the feast, on the first day of unleavened bread, okay, when the Paschal lambs were sacrificed, and the disciples say to him, where shall we go to prepare that may eat the Passover? He sends two of his disciples and says to them, go into the city, and a man carrying a pitcher of water will meet you and follow him. That's crazy. Jesus, similar to the colt with Palm Sunday, he just tells them what to do and they'll be fine. In verse 14, wherever he may enter, say to the householder, the teacher says, where is the guest chamber where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? So it's basically a house, treated like an upstairs type of thing. So that's what that situation is there. And he will show you a large upper room, furnished already, there, prepare for us. The disciples went forth and came into the city and found everything as he had said to them, and they prepared the Passover. And evening being come, he comes with the 12. I think it's interesting to think about this. He just says, you'll see a guy carrying some water. You go ahead and go to him. He'll say the room. It's already ready for us. You know how abnormal that is? That's like, that would be like you on Inauguration Day, or in England when the King and Queen of William and Kate back in the day were getting coronated, and you go, I say to you, hey, go to the Buckingham Palace and let them know that I sent you. And they go, oh yeah, I have a whole place on the yard here for you to sit. Really? During a day like this? It should be packed. Jerusalem is packed and stacked with people at the Passover. And this guy has just a room just empty, ready for the master and 12 people. Really? That's not normal. It's not normal. So it tells you that God already had told him, have this room prepared. Didn't tell him why. I'm going to have somebody come tell you why. You just do what I tell you. Which I would have loved to know who this person was. This person of the household, this man of the house must have been like, I don't know, but God said do it, I'm doing it. So that's a man of faith. That's a great man of faith, because he could have made money, or he could have helped out somebody else in his family by staying up there during a big, busy time now in the feast. But it just kind of shows you he stood up for what his faith told him to do, which is God told him to wait on this moment, and he did. Disciples went forth from the city. In verse 16, came in the city, found everything like he said. And then in verse 18, after they all came 12 together in the evening, this is 6 p.m. yesterday. Verse 18, and as they were reclining at the table and eating, Jesus said, indeed, I say to you, that one of you eating with me will deliver me up. And they began to be sorrowful and say to him one by one, is it I? Notice how in Mark he points out they became to be sorrowful. He doesn't point out the sorrow in Matthew. So Mark's pointing out, because remember, Mark points out the servanthood of Jesus. So he's pointing out that, we were starting to be sorrowful losing our master. And then because remember, Mark's not a disciple. Matthew was a disciple, and so was John. Mark and Luke, gospel writers, are not disciples of Christ in the 12. Mark was a writer and scribe to Peter. It's John Mark, the cousin or nephew to Barnabas. And you have Luke, who's the doctor to Paul. Okay, he's a convert. So they're not disciples of the 12 apostles. Okay, they're disciples, but not 12 apostles. So verse 20 of Mark 14, and he said to them, is it that one of the 12 dipping in me with the dish? The Son of Man indeed goes away to death, even as has been written concerning him. But woe to that man, for whom the Son of Man is delivered up. Good word for that man if he had not been born. We already talked about that, because it means better to not know Jesus than to know him and disobey him. That's a bad place to be, because we're highly accountable for all he's done for us. Verse 22, and as they were eating, he took a loaf, having given praise, he broke it and gave to them and said, take, this is my body. Again, he is going against every normalcy of tradition of Passover, which, by the way, in his ministry he has done 3 times prior. Remember? He did it at the beginning of his ministry, at the end of the first year, end of the second year. This is his 3rd year. It's his 4th Passover. This is the first time he's talking like this. And that's got to freak you out. Everything's different. The entrance into Jerusalem for the Passover, that was different. You didn't do that before with the donkey and Hosanna. That's different. And then you did all the discourse. That's different. 6 days prior, she anoints your feet with her hair. And now 2 days prior, she anoints your head. There's a lot of things going on different. And you said, I'm going to be crucified. And you also said, I'm going to be raised up. I mean, everything's different. Plus, they saw the temple get purged twice, Sunday and Monday. They hadn't seen that since the beginning of his ministry. A lot of things are different. You would think they had paid attention and went like, something's not normal about this. This is not a normal Passover. I mean, there's a lot of things different. And they didn't pay attention. They were so wrapped up in it. I'm not going to make fun of them. I'm saying that the human mind, sometimes you get caught up in the emotion in the moment, and you miss the forest for the trees, as they say. So here he says, take, this is my body. I would have right there go, what are you talking about? That's not a, what? What? And in verse 23, and taking a cup, having given thanks, he gave it to him, and they all drank out of it. Verse 24, he said, this is the blood of mine, which is of the covenant, which is poured out for many. Which again, blood ratifies the covenant, makes it a testament. By the way, lawyers get the idea, your last will and testament. They call it that because when your blood is shed, you die, and now your will becomes a testament that you cannot change. That's where lawyers got it from. This is why it's called the Old and New Testament. Ratified by the blood of Jesus, you can't change it. That's our legal people get this stuff from this. So in verse 25, indeed I say to you that I will drink of the product of the vine no more till the day when I drink it anew in the kingdom of God. See, before he said my Father's kingdom in Matthew, remember? Now he says the kingdom and the kingdom of God. And it's actually an interesting phrasing. It's the kingdom of the God, speaking of on earth. Right? So it almost speaks to like the end of that millennial reign potentially, to align it with the Matthew passage. That's the timeline here. So he's telling you at the beginning of day 8, but it happens here as well as up in there. It's both, right? So in verse 26, that's what Luke 13 talked about earlier, then when he said he rises up from his throne. In verse 26, having sung, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Remember? That's what Matthew mentioned as well. And Jesus says to them, you will all stumble. You will all be stumbled, because it is written, I will smite the shepherd, and the sheep will be dispersed. But after I am raised, I'll proceed to Galilee. See, there he goes. I'll be raised. Told him again. Verse 29, Peter said to him, even if we stumble, yet I will not. If I'll stumble, I will not. Jesus said to him, indeed, I say to you that this day and this night, before the cock crows twice, thou wilt disown me thrice. But he spoke with more vehemence, which means Peter was doing this at the actual time of this midnight hour. He was in the midst of the 3 times they blow the ram's horn. After the second time, before the third time, that's when he is betraying him. That's what Jesus is talking about. He's pinpointing the actual moment. This happened very quickly. He says twice for the third time. He's pointing out the time frame was quick. In other words, people think, well, did it get from, I don't know him, to I promise you I don't know him, to I'm cussing and swearing I don't know him? Did it happen over 45 minutes? No. It happened over just within a minute. He went that quickly, that deeply different. And that's crazy. It shows you how, again, I don't know about you, but I can get angry quickly. You can go from calmness to angry. You ever drive on the highway in America? You can go from calm to angry in no time at all. It just takes the right Yahoo to cut you off, or to clip you, or flick you off for no reason. You're like, what is that about? And all of a sudden, you're having a relaxed, calm day, and I was like, what are you doing? Where did that come from? That's what's happening to Peter. He went from, I won't deny you, to, I don't know him. I promise you I don't know him. No, dude, relax. From less than a minute or two, he went from chill to amped up to freaking vile within about 1 or 2 minutes. That's what Jesus is talking about in verse 30. The timeline was quick of this ramped up sinfulness. It's so crazy. So then he goes, and I can't see your question, unfortunately, because there's a window up on the screen. You got to type something else that would have come up. Sorry, I can't see it. So, and he says, but he spoke with more vehemence, and if I must die with you, I will by no means disown you. And they all said the same. Again, we saw that in Matthew. They followed suit. And they came to the place called Gethsemane, and he says to his disciples, sit here while I go away and pray. Zechariah 13:7 is the answer. Okay, there you go. Zechariah 13:7. Oh, the answer to the verse about striking the shepherd and the sheep will scatter. Thank you. Sorry about that, Todd. Thank you. And then he says, in verse 33, he takes with him Peter and James and John, and began to be greatly amazed and full of anguish. Same thing Matthew was talking about. He was, again, sorrowful, and he was extremely sorrowful, really just encumbered by it. And that's what Mark's pointing out. They both recognize this. Verse 34, and he says to them, my soul is encompassed with a deadly anguish. Stay here and watch. So how would Mark know this since he wasn't there? Because Peter was the scribe of Mark, which means Mark's telling the story on behalf of Peter. The interesting part is Luke. How would Luke know it? Because he's the doctor for Paul. Paul was in here. That's interesting. He writes about the whole life of Jesus, including the death and resurrection. So you're like, that's interesting. Mark, I can see, because Peter told the whole thing. What that tells you about Luke is, by the way, don't forget, Paul's the one who God gave to write 1 Corinthians 11 about communion. So Paul knows a lot more than you think, that he wasn't even a part of. Jesus still had 3 years to teach him. He told him everything. That's a lot. So therefore, that's why Paul was able to tell Luke, which means Paul was given a down low on all the things Jesus did when he was here with the 12 before he became one of them, which is pretty awesome. Anyway, I digress. Go back to Mark 14, verse 34. And he says to them, my soul is encompassed with a deadly anguish. Stay here and watch. Same thing as we see. There's this anguish in verse 33, then it's a deadly anguish in verse 34. He's compounding it just like Matthew did. They're both concurring the same emotional, mental, physical rot of spiritual weight on Jesus. It's visible, it's palatable. In verse 35, going forward a little while, he fell on the ground. He prayed that if it possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, Abba, Father. Interesting. He didn't say Abba over in Matthew. Here he's pointing out that Jesus said, Abba, Father, all things are possible with you. Abba, why is that important? It's an endearing sense. It's like he's crying out with an endearment to his tone. Not in helplessness, in endearment. All things are possible with you. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what thou wilt. He's pointing out, yes, all things are possible, but we have agreed upon this. And he's just showing you that he too, as in a man's frail state, is letting you know Living in the ordained will of God he did unto himself is not easy when you're going through the actual pain. That's all he's trying to show you. He's not showing you, well, I thought about saying, no, that's not what he's doing. If that's true, then Philippians 2 is a liar. Because Paul said in Philippians 2 that for 1 minute did he consider it robbery to be equal with God. He was submitted, he was subjected to it, committed the whole time. He was 100% in on the servanthood, humility thing. He never once questioned it. So this is not a questioning, it's more of an endearment of showing us the struggle with sin. In verse 37, he comes and finds them sleeping and says to Peter, Simon, sleepest thou? Couldst thou not keep awake a single hour? Now that's interesting, because his name was Simon Bar-Jonah, and Jesus called him Peter. His whole ministry, he called him Peter. When he called him Simon, Peter, he said to Peter, Simon. When you say that, it's kind of like your mom when calls you by your full name. You know you're in trouble. So my mom used to call me Prestoni Macaroni as a funny thing. I didn't like that, but that was when she was being nice to me. When she was ugly to me, she never said that. So if I heard Prestoni Macaroni, I didn't like it. At least I wasn't going to get beat, though, when I heard it. But if I heard my name, I could have something bad happen. So when Peter heard his name being said, not the name Jesus gave him, but the name his dad gave him, he's like, wait a minute, why are you using that name? That's kind of a check, you know. It's kind of like, hey, I want you to check your spirit here. Could you not, again, keep awake a single hour? Watch and pray that you enter not into trial. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. Notice how Peter's the one who led with, I won't deny you, and they all said, yes, we won't. But then when he takes Peter, James, and John to go and pray, Jesus again singles out Peter and says, why didn't you stay awake for 1 hour? Like as if to say, you're in charge of James and John. You should have led by example. It's harsh. It's harsh. They all fell asleep, but he charges Peter directly. He doesn't say that to Peter, James, and John, just to Peter he says that. And he says, watch and pray, enter not into trial, verse 38, the spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. And going again, he prayed, speaking the same words, and again he came and found them sleeping, and their eyes were overpowered, and they knew not what to answer him. And he comes the third time and says to them, do you sleep now, and take your rest? It is enough, the hour is come. Behold, the Son of Man is delivered up into the hands of sinners. Arise, let us go. Behold, he who delivers me up is come. And immediately while he was yet speaking, comes Judas, being one of the 12, and with him a crowd, armed with swords and clubs, and the high priest, and the scribes, and the elders. And the betrayer had given them a signal, saying, he it is whom I may kiss, seize him, and lead him away safely. You see, Judas had no idea they had plans to kill him. He was ignorant to it. He was oblivious to it. He thought if they tried to do it, it wouldn't matter. He's going to be king, and he's going to kick their butt. He did not know this whole suffering servant part, and didn't know the nefarious. He was naive to it. Verse 45, and coming and immediately approaching him, he says, Rabbi, and repeatedly kissed him. Then they laid hands on him and seized him again, forcefully with violence, not nicety. And one of those standing by drew a sword and struck the servant of the high priest, cut off his ear tip. Jesus answering said to them, as is a pursuit of a robber, have you come with swords and clubs to take me, just like Matthew said? I was with you every day in the temple teaching you, and you did not arrest me, but the scriptures must be verified. And leaving him, they all fled, meaning the apostles. As soon as times got tough, they all left, like I mentioned before. You know who your friends are when the chips are down. You know, the police show up, all of a sudden they're out, right? I need you to be we had a person, I'm not going to mention it, we had a person in the family that did a character witness to speak well of them because they did something wrong. They did something wrong. Not justifiable, it was wrong. But we knew that circumstances being what they were, if all things was normal, he wouldn't have done it. Still wrong, so I wanted to rewrote character letters for him. But one person in the family and his wife said, no, there's a reason they arrested him. That's not the point, man. He had his worst. You want to kick him when he's down? Goodness gracious. That's what's happening here. Are you there for somebody when they need you, when everything looks stacked against them? And that's when you know where your character's at. And their character, the disciples, wasn't strong enough to stay there with him by his side when everything looked bleak. They were like, I'm going to cut bait and leave. This doesn't look good. So they just left him. Left him. Then in verse 51, a certain youth, which is Mark, by the way, followed him with the linen cloth wrapped around his naked body, and they seized him. But leaving the linen cloth, he fled naked, meaning just that underwear piece. He wasn't like buck naked. He was talking about there's an overcoat and that over tunic that was gone. All he had left was just like little, underwear piece. He just took off. He's like, he was scared. He was scared. I mean, I'd be scared too. If I saw these disciples leave and now I see them coming by my door, I don't want to hang around. you grab a hold of me, I'm out. So I get it. I don't blame John Mark. But this is the same John Mark that in the book of Acts, Paul got mad with because he cut bait and left when Paul started being aggressive and like a bull in a china shop. So John Mark has already been through trauma, and this is his history of first encountering Jesus. He saw all disciples forsake him, then they grabbed him, then he left, and then later on, he's already like been trying. He has some PTSD, you know. He's not good. He's not good with this. And any woman or man who's been through trauma, a man in wartime, a woman through some whatever stuff, it's not easy to get past that stuff. My sister would say when my dad raises her voice before he died, raises his voice, she would just still cringe. I'm like, are you serious? She was, yeah, I still think about him hitting me. I'm like, he's an old man now. But she just has that reaction. So I get it. That there's certain traumatic things. When dogs hear fireworks, they're like, it's my Vietnam, man. You know, because dogs don't like fireworks, right? So you got to remember, this is John Mark. He went through a traumatic experience first seeing Jesus. What do you expect him to do 10 years later when he sees the Apostle Paul go off in this bull china shop in between there, knowing he was a murderer for 2 years? Kind of would freak you out. I'm just saying, I get John Mark's reaction. So I'm not blaming him, but I get his, I'm not justifying him either. I just get his humanness, right? So back in Mark 14:53, they conducted Jesus to the high priest, and the high priest and the elders and the scribes came together to him. And Peter followed him at a distance, even into the palace of the high priest, and sat in the company with the attendants, warming himself before the fire. By the way, don't forget, this is a charcoal fire, which is the same charcoal fire. Jesus sees him on the beach side when he's cooking fish, and he says to him, do you love me? That whole thing happened with a charcoal fire. Now, I don't know about you, but in our country, Memorial Day, July 4th, we always have cookouts, and a charcoal fire, different from a gas fire, it's a different smell. Especially when you have charcoal briquettes, it's even cooler, with little wood pellets, even smells even better. But we all know that barbecue smell, right? It's kind of cool. I like it. Hot dogs, hamburgers, ribs, right? So imagine the charcoal smell. It's very distinct. And the last time you smelled it was when you betrayed Jesus. And all of a sudden, Jesus knows that. And he's like, hey, Peter, come have some fish. And he's like, that's cold, man. You have a charcoal fire. You reminded me of the last time I had that smell. It's the worst day of my life. I know. I'll make it the best day of your life. How about that? I'll restore you. It's so cool. Jesus is so cool like that. So when he's doing this by the fire, it's a charcoal fire. We're going to learn about it later. It's going to tell you that. But verse 55, while the high priest and the whole Sanhedrin sought testimony against Jesus in order to kill him, but they found none. Men trying to gin up bad testimony, nothing was there. The men testified falsely against him, but their testimonies were insufficient, meaning their lies didn't hold water. They weren't good enough. They wanted some more stronger lies or stronger narrative. Let's do some other half-truths. So when some standing up testified falsely against him, saying, verse 58, Mark 14, we heard him just declare, I will destroy this temple made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another made without hands. But even thus was their testimony, but not even thus was their testimony sufficient. And the high priest standing up in the midst asked Jesus, saying, answer thou nothing to what these testify against you? Then he was silent and answered nothing. And the high priest asked him and says to him, art thou the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? And Jesus said, I am. I love it. I am. And you shall see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the mighty One, and coming with the clouds of heaven. And the high priest, having rent his garment, says, what further need have we of witnesses? You have heard the blasphemy. What is your opinion? And they all condemned him as worthy of death. And some began to spit on him, cover his face. See, he didn't say that in the book of Matthew. They spit on him, cover his face, and then beat him with their fist and say to him, divine to us. And the attendant struck him on the cheek with the open hand. So they're basically, again, he's going to more descriptive nature of how they were mocking Jesus, putting a bag over his head, a cloth, and then hitting him as if to, again, mock his deity. If you're so smart, you're so godly, you should know divine who hit you. Peter being below in the courtyard, there comes one of the maidservants of the high priest, and seeing Peter warming himself, earnestly looking at him, and says, thou wast with the Nazarene, Jesus. Now I want you to put yourself in the shoes of Peter. The person you've seen your whole life. There's no problem he can't handle. There's no rebuttal he can't win. There's no debate. He's been like the Charlie Kirk on steroids for these people. They've come in with everything they want to out of their wood case. You know, the law of Moses, they want to trick him up with that. He's like, gotcha, ace that. They accused him of doing things wrong. Book of John's good about this. And he just constantly shows how ignorant they are, how they're lying, hypocrisy. They have no debates. They can't win the fight.
When there's a miracle to be done, he does the miracle. They go, you can't forgive sins. He goes, oh, that's too hard for you? Just watch this. Take up your mat and walk. And they knew the dude was lame from birth. He's like, whoa. And they're like, how do you do? Dude just making me mad. Whatever they would want to do to trip him up, he'd up this ante. He always would trump them all the time. So whatever they did, he just outdid them. Whatever the argument was, he just would show them something else. And always. So Peter's seen him every single time. Never lose an argument. Never lose the grasp of the situation. Always be in control. Never lose control. Always own it. Demons kowtowed to him. I mean, goodness gracious. And spiritual and physical, nothing could touch this man. He was the Messiah. And now he just witnessed him being beat and punched and spat on and made fun of, and he did nothing and said nothing. So that's demoralizing if you're Peter. What is going on? I've never seen this before. Why is this happening? So you could, now sure, Jesus told him 2 days ago, I'm going to be crucified, when I was up from the dead. Yeah, that's easy to remember that. But in the moment of this, I can see how in the throes of this particular heightened emotion moment, you can forget that. I'm just trying to defend Peter a little bit, especially he doesn't have a living Holy Spirit in him. He's still a dead spiritual man. And so he doesn't understand. So in verse 68, he said he denied, when they said, you know him, Jesus of Nazareth, he denies, I neither know nor understand what you are saying. See, notice how in Matthew he just said, I don't know him. And then that Galilean, then he said, I promise you I don't know the Nazarene. And then he got mad and cussed and swore. Here, Mark is telling you that he starts off by saying, I don't know or understand what you're saying. What are we talking about? Like trying to act dumb. You know what she's saying, bro. That you hang out with him, okay? That's not, he's one of your boys. You know, you're one of his guys, one of his boys. He said, no, I'm not. I don't know. And he went out. And the maidservant, seeing him, said to those standing by, this is one of them. And he denied it again. And after a little, those standing by said again to Peter, certainly you are one of them, for you are also a Galilean. Then he began to curse and swear, I know not this man of whom you speak. Gosh, it's the more you read it, the more it's gut-wrenching to think what we're all capable of doing. And immediately, for a second time, the cock crew. Peter recollected the word which Jesus spoke to him, for a cock crows twice, thou wilt disown me thrice. And reflecting on it, he wept. I can tell you what I can tell you about this, and I'm not going to make fun of Peter. And I've been through a situation in my past over 30 years ago. There was a time in retail, long and short, they were doing a big crackdown on some theft. And so they were announcing to us, hey, we're going to do audits, we're going to do this and that, we're going to find the evil actors and the bad doers and all this stuff. And I'm like, I didn't do anything wrong, so I'm cool, I don't care. But there was a rule that says you can never jump on a register and ring out your own family. Well, we were busy one day, and I rung out my own brother on the register because we were busy. It's not a regular practice. I just jumped on and did it. Shouldn't have done it technically, but I was trying to get through the line. I was not just for him. I was doing it for everybody. I just go to this line, started with him, and everybody else kept on there. And da-da-da. So nothing hidden. It was open. Cameras everywhere. So they see me and go, hey, why'd you do that? And I go, because as you can see, there's the line. I just, whatever. And they go, you can't run after brother. I know, but technically, I wasn't just doing it with him. I was doing the whole line, releasing the whole. And they go, yeah, but still wrong. And I go, okay, fine. That was local people. Then the regional people called me on the phone and said, do you know, and named my brother's name and his wife's name. Said, do you know these people? And I said, no. Said his full name. Blank Belair and his wife, Blank Belair. And I said, no, I do not know them. Because I was scared that he was going to fire me and trump up some charges against me because of what I had heard. Sounds familiar. Peter's thinking they're going to come get me. And he's dealing with way more pressure than I was. And if I cracked under man's pressure, this is the pressure against God himself. I can only imagine the stress Peter was under. So I'm not going to make fun of him. I've been there. And I'm telling you, it's not as easy as you think to stand up when the pressure's on. So I don't make fun of him at all. And then, by the way, within like the same minute, I go, why did I say that? So stupid. I hung up the phone, called right back. Hey man, I know why I said that. That was stupid. That was stupid. That was dumb. That's my brother. That's his wife, my sister-in-law. He goes, no, too late. You already lied. And I go, yeah, technically yes, but within the same minute, it calls right back. I don't know. It's stupid, man. I was just afraid you're trying to trump charges against me. I'm so paranoid. People trying to always do something bad against me all the time. He goes, no, too late. You're already a liar. I'm like, whatever. And that was the end. That's what I ended up. I see, they tried to put pressure on me to quit, so I did. That's how that career ended in retail.
and one of the things long ago. So anyway, there's that to remind me of what Peter went through. I'm thinking, I went through it from a human pressure standpoint and cracked. He's under a lot more spiritual pressure and cracked, so I'm very lenient to him because I am no different, and I get it. I see him in heaven, he's going to go, make fun of me, look at you, bro. No, I got it, I saw it, I got it. So Mark 15, verse 1, and immediately in the morning, the high priest and the elders and the scribes, even the whole Sanhedrin, held a council. Having bound Jesus, they delivered him up to Pilate. And Pilate asked him, Art thou king of the Jews? And he answering said to them, Thou sayest. And the high priest accused him of many things. And Pilate asked him again, saying, Answer thou nothing? See how many things thou accuse thee of? But Jesus answered no more, so that Pilate was astonished. Now at each feast he used to release to them one prisoner, whoever they asked. And there was he who was named Barabbas, having been in prison with the insurgents, who had committed murder in the insurrection. And the crowd going up began to demand what he was accustomed to grant them. But Pilate answering them, saying, Do you wish me to release to you the king of the Jews? For he knew that they had delivered him up from envy. See, Matthew and Mark both record they knew it was envy from Pilate knowing this. But the high priest stirred up the crowd. They should rather release Barabbas to them. And Pilate answered again, said to them, What then shall I do to him, called king of the Jews? And they again cried out, Crucify him! And Pilate said to them, For what? He has done evil? But they vehemently cried out again, Crucify him! Then Pilate, being willing to gratify the crowd, see, he just wanted to placate the crowd, released Barabbas to them, having scourged Jesus, delivered him up to be crucified. And the soldiers led him away and into the court where the praetorium, and they called together the whole company. And they arrayed him in a purple garment, because what's happening is Matthew and Mark are telling you both different timelines of the judgments of Pilate. Pilate scourged Jesus once, then realized he said he was from Galilee. I'm going to send him over to Herod. And then Herod said, Oh, ha, ha. And he puts on a white robe, sends him back, and then Pilate does it again, starts a second time, and then the purple robe goes on. So that's why it was scarlet, white, and then it was purple. So that's what they're showing you here. There are different angles of two different times Pilate judged Jesus. So there was two judgments that Pilate gave to Jesus. You'll see that in Luke when we get there in just a minute. And they arrayed him in a purple garment, and intertwined an Acacian wreath, which is a crown of thorns, placed on his head. They began to salute him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews. And they struck his head with the reed and spit on him. And kneeling did homage to him. Again, mocked him, just like Matthew said. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the purple garment. They put on him his own clothes, let him out. So it's two times. The first time Pilate judged him, put a scarlet robe on him. They healed to his wounds, ripped it off, and that hurt. Then to Herod, he comes back, whip him again, put a purple robe on him, rip it off again. It's very painful. I'm just telling you, it's very painful. You ever had an open wound and then a cloth adheres to it and you rip it off, it is extremely painful. Not to mention he's being whipped and scourged and all this. And then verse 21, And one Simon the Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus, coming from the country, was passing by, and they compelled him to carry his cross. And they bring him to Golgotha, which being translated is place of the skull. Now imagine being Simon, they're compelling you. I mean, I wouldn't say no, but maybe you would, but you didn't have a choice. They said, You're going to do it. And they presented in verse 23 him wine mingled with myrrh, and he did not receive it. And they nailed him to the cross, and they parted his garments, casting lots for them what each should take. This is what Psalm 22 talks about. And it was the third hour when they nailed him to the cross. And the inscription of his accusation was written over him, the King of the Jews. And with him they crucified two robbers. And again, just like in Matthew, the word with is soon, which is in general sense, which means there was more folks. And then the other at his right, one at his right hand, one at his left hand. And the scripture was verified, saying he was numbered with the lawbreakers. And those passing along reviled him, shaking their heads, and said, Thou destroyer of the temple and builder of it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross. In like manner also the high priest, deriding, which means they were making sport of Jesus, making games with the scribes, and said to each other, He saved others, he can save himself. That's what it means when it says derided him. They're making sport. They're having fun. They're being jerks. They're bullying him. I've been through that in high school. The Messiah, the King of Israel, let him come down from the cross, that he may see and believe. We may see and believe. Even those who were crucified with him reproached him. Notice how it says, even those crucified with him reproached him. Matthew says it, and Mark says it. They both say, those crucified with him reproached him. Important to know this when you get to Luke, and the guy says, Be with me in paradise. Explain to me how they both can reproach him. At this point, not only on the way to the cross, they're actually on the cross, and they're doing it. That's interesting. So on the cross, not only an hour later, but within the same moments in time, you go from da-da-da-da-da to, oh, remember me in your kingdom. What happened in a few minutes? What? How do you go from vile disgust to all of a sudden saying you like Jesus? Unless you're a different person, which it is. Verse 33, and the 6th hour being come, Mark 15:33, there was darkness over the whole land till the 9th hour. In the 9th hour Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eli, 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 lama sabachthani, which is being translated, my God, why hast thou surrendered me? Muslims, the day is long, use that verse to say he was helpless. No, doofus, he's quoting Psalm 22 to let you know he's fulfilling Scripture. This is all, he's willing himself to put himself out there to pay your sin debt. They don't understand, they're so ignorant. Verse 35, and some of those standing by, hearing this, said, behold, he calls Elijah. And one ran and filled a sponge with vinegar, and putting it on a reed, gave him to drink, saying, let him alone, let us see whether Elijah will come to take him down. Interesting, you have wine, vinegar, gall. Passover is always supposed to be celebrated with bitter herbs. It sounds pretty bitter to me. He's fulfilling the Paschal lamb sacrifice. Thus Jesus, verse 37, uttering a loud voice, expired. And the veil of the temple was rent from top and then two from top to bottom. And that centurion who stood by over against him, seeing that he expired, said, certainly this man was the Son of God. And women also beholding from a distance, among whom was Mary of Magdala, and Mary, the mother of James and younger, and of Jose and Salome. And when he was in Galilee, following him and ministered to him, and many others who came up with him to Jerusalem. And evening being now come, since it was the preparation that is day for the Sabbath, it says here that you have that Joseph came, who was of Arimathea, an honorable senator, who himself was also expecting the kingdom of God, meaning he didn't expect Jesus to be killed, but then to usher in God's kingdom. Taking courage, went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. And Pilate wondered that he was already dead. And having called the centurion, he inquired of him if he was already dead. And so verse 45, having ascertained from the centurion, he gave the dead body to Joseph. And having bought linen, taking him down, he wrapped him in the linen and put him in the tomb which he had hewn out of the rock, and he rolled the stone at the entrance of the tomb. And Mary of Magdala, that Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw where he was laid. Now we go forward to Luke 22. Two more gospel writers to read about. Luke 22, reading again from the time of Passover through. Then you get to Luke 22, and he says, now that feast of unleavened bread, which is called the Passover, was drawing near. And the high priests and scribes, Luke 22, verse 2, sought how they might kill him, for they feared the people. And the adversary, see this is where it's the adversary entered into Judas. He had no chance. So folks always go, why did Judas do that? Like he had a choice at this point. But the question is, why was he in that position for Satan to enter into him? See, that's his fault. He put himself in a position for Satan to do this. So even though Jesus ordained it, he was responsible to submit to God's will, so trying to use God's will to mold Jesus into what he wanted. He's supposed to have Jesus mold him into what Jesus wanted. So Judas was opening himself up. Satan then comes into him, which is ridiculous. Who was number of the 12? So Satan literally came into Judas. That is wild. Then in verse 4, he went and talked with the high priests and officers, how he might deliver them up to them. And they were glad and agreed to give him money. And he consented and sought a convenient time to deliver him up to them in the absence of the crowd. Now the day of unleavened bread came, on which it was necessary to sacrifice the Paschal lamb. And they sent Peter and John, saying, go prepare the Passover for us, that we may eat. And they said to him, where dost thou go? Where dost thou wish where we prepare for thee to eat the Passover? And he said to them, behold, as you enter the city, a man carrying a pitcher of water will meet you. Follow him into the house where he enters. And you'll say to the master of the house, teacher says to you, where is the guest chamber where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? He will show you an upper room, furnished already, there prepared. And they went up and found all that he had said to them, and they prepared the Passover. Again, it's just a wild thing to have this guy have this already prepared, waiting for someone to say, oh, you're the guy sent by the master? Sure, here it is. In verse 14, and when the hour came, he reclined with the apostles with him. And he said to them, I have earnestly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. That's a new added statement versus what Matthew and Mark didn't say. You would think by saying this, he's earmarking this fourth Passover of my ministry is different than the other three, right? I would have, like, why are you saying this one is more important, you know? Something's different about this one. He said that in verse 15. I earnestly desire to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. Not only do I earnestly desire to do it with you before I suffer. What did you just say? Why is this one different, earnestly desiring? And what do you mean by suffer? I just told you 2 days ago I'm going to be crucified and rise up from the dead. It's just so many hints, so many clues. It just shows you the human emotion. We can't keep track. Verse 16, for I say to you, I will not eat of it till it shall be fulfilled in the kingdom of God. Taking a cup, having given thanks, he said, take this and divide it amongst yourselves. For I say to you, I will not drink from henceforth of the product of the vine till the kingdom of God shall come. And taking the loaf, having given thanks, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, this is my body, which is given to you. This do in my remembrance. And like when after the cup, after the supper, and this is the new covenant in my blood, that which is being poured out. But behold, the hand of him who delivered me up is with mine on the table. Notice how he says, this do by remembrance, which is in concert with what Paul wrote about in 1 Corinthians, which makes sense because Paul told Luke about this, but the other writers, Matthew and Mark, didn't mention that phrasing, my remembrance, right? So it's interesting how he's repeating what Jesus told Paul. And in verse 21, again, the one's going to deliver me over is going to betray me, right? And in verse 22, for indeed Son of Man is going away according to that which has been appointed, but woe to that man whom he is delivered up. And they began to inquire amongst themselves which of them could be who was about to do this. Remember how, again, there was contention about who was the great, who stood as right and left before Palm Sunday with James and John. And Mark, it mentioned how they were sorrowful. And now in Luke, it tells you that there was, in verse 23, they were inquiring among themselves who this could be. But in verse 24, and there was also a contention among them, which of them should be thought the greatest. Are you serious, man? Isn't that crazy? I can't, it's just so hard to believe that the 12 apostles, during this time, with this endearing moment, he's already showing you a different level of Passover tradition. He's not following tradition at all. He starts off with, I earnestly want to do this with you before I suffer. He's changing the game, how the things are working, and you go to who's the greatest. It's just beyond. Remember, Luke wants to show him as a man. That's Luke's presentation of Jesus. So he's showing us the contrast between this is a man. This is how a man is. He's meek and strong. This is how a man is without God, selfish and self-absorbed. Who's the greatest? Are you kidding me right now? In verse 25, and he said to them, the kings of the nations exercise dominion over them, and those having authority over them are styled benefactors. But you must not be so, but let the greatest among you also be the least, and the governor as he who serves. For who is greater, he who reclines or he who serves? It's not he who reclines, but I am among you as he who serves. And you are they who continued with me in my trials. And I covenant for you, even as my Father has covenanted for me, a kingdom. What? So that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and sit on thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. He's making very clear there's a covenant with them, not with everybody, those 11, and they're going to judge 12 tribes of Israel. And look in verse 31 though. Simon, Simon, not Peter. He says Simon. He uses that name. Peter must go, ooh, something bad's about to follow. I'm going to get chided. Sure enough. Behold, the adversary, Satan, has asked for you that he may sift you like wheat. I'd have said, well, tell him no. Like, why are you telling me he's asking you? You're God. Tell him pound sand. But no. Jesus said, but I have prayed for you that the faith may not fail, and when you have turned, strengthen your brother. Reminds you of the Job story, right? Why are you bringing me up to Satan, God? If I was Job after the fact. I didn't even have anything to do with that. God brought, have you considered Job? Just like here. Satan goes to Jesus. If I'm Simon, I'm like, you said Satan asked to sift me like wheat. Well, tell him to go fly a kite. You're Jesus. And tell him no. But no, it's not what happened. It's going to happen. I just want to pray for you. When you are strengthened, when you turn, when you recover, basically, you turn back, strengthen your brethren. I like it. See, I wonder if Judas was told, God would have said to Judas, I know you're going to betray me, but I'm going to forgive you if you can come to terms with that. He never had that. To be fair to him, Peter had this in his back of his mind that Jesus said this to him. Judas didn't have that. And his thing was worse. So it's harder for him. I think why Peter in the book of Acts mentions Judas out unsolicited 4 weeks later, as if to say, I know what it's like to do something wrong and look him in the eye and sin against him. But he gave me this thing about being turned and strengthened in my brothers. I wish my brother Judas would have known that too. I think he was thinking, if I didn't have that, would I have been easily as able to come back to be in love with Jesus again and accept his forgiveness. I think Peter's realizing it's hard to accept forgiveness for your sins when they're so dark and deep and you just can't live with yourself. And it wants to make you kill yourself like Judas. So, verse 33 back to Luke 22, verse 33. And he said to him, Master, I'm ready to go with you both to prison and to death. And he said, I tell you, Peter, a cock will crow today till thou shalt thrice deny that thou hast known me. And he said to them, when I sent you out without a purse and a bag and sandals, did you want anything? And they said, nothing. And he said to them, but now, he who has a purse, let him take it. And in like manner a bag. He who has no sword, let him sell his mantle and buy one. For I tell you that this which has been written must be fully accomplished in me. And he was numbered with the lawbreakers, for also the things concerning me have an end. And so basically, and then they said to him in verse 38, and they said, Master, behold, here are 2 swords. And he said to them, that'll do. That's sufficient. So, and who's the one saying that? Well, one of them is Peter. He had a sword. We know that because he struck Malchus's ear. The other one was more than likely Simon the Zealot, because he was known to be called that for a reason. That's one of the disciples. So the reality is, what Peter and Simon the Zealot heard Jesus say, the other ones heard him say, was, hey, I don't mind you having a sword, but before, you didn't need to use it. The time's coming, you're going to need to use it, because I won't be here to protect you forever. But just know, it's just be a last resort. But there is going to come a time you need to use it. So, again, Peter's defense, he heard this. That's probably why he used it in the garden, thinking, I thought you said, well, not now, when I'm gone. And that's as a last resort, too. There's 2 things you missed there. When I'm gone, and as a last resort. Not a first resort, and while I'm still here. You got it wrong twice. You failed. So, in verse 39, and going out, he went out according to his custom to the Mount of Olives. The disciples also followed him. Having arrived at the place, and he said to them, pray that you may not enter into trial. And he retired from them about a stone's throw, and kneeling down he prayed, saying, Father, if thou were willing, take away this cup from me, yet not by my will, but thine be done. And he appeared, and look at verse 43, and there appeared to him an angel from heaven, strengthening him. Matthew and Mark don't mention this. Luke says an angel appeared and strengthened him. That's pretty cool, man. He doesn't need that, but as a man, he was weak. And being in agony, he prayed very earnestly. And his sweat was like clots of blood falling down to the ground. So Luke gets more into the humanity of, he needed to be strengthened, and he was very weak, and it was like blood coming out of his pores. It was that much stress. That is a real thing. And nurses know this. You can have some blood when you sweat when you're under a lot of stress. And so rising from prayer and coming to the disciples, he found them sleeping from grief. But there's no mention of Peter, James, and John being earmarked out. We know that from Matthew and Mark, but Luke doesn't single that out. But here he says he finds them in grief. They were sleeping from grief, not just from fatigue, but from grief. Grief of what? You can probably tell that they're starting to get something is not right, you know. And in verse 46, he said to them, why do you sleep? Arise and pray that you may not enter into trial. And in verse 47, while he was yet speaking, behold, a crowd. And when he who was called Judas, one of the 12, preceded them, he drew near to Jesus to kiss him. But Jesus said to him, Judas, dost thou betray the Son of Man with a kiss? And those about him perceiving what was about transpiring said, Master, shall we strike with the sword? And one of them struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his right ear. But Jesus answering said, let this suffice. And he touched his ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the high priest and officers of the temple and elders who are coming against him, as in pursuit of a robber have you come with swords and clubs to take me? When I was with you every day in the temple, you did not stretch out your hands against me. But this is your hour and the power of darkness. Another thing that he did not say in Matthew and Mark. Jesus makes it clear, this is your hour. In other words, live it up now, because this is your time to be evil. And verse 54, and they having seized him, led him away and brought him to the house of the high priest. But Peter followed at a distance. Every writer mentions this. He's following but at a distance. And they having kindled a fire in the midst of the court, sat down together, and Peter sat down among them. And a certain maidservant, seeing him sitting by the light, looking steadily at him. See, this one, Luke is different. Luke is saying she was staring at him for a while. like sizing him up. Well, I know you. And she said, this man also was with him. But he denied, saying, woman, I do not know him. Verse 58, after a little, another saw him and said, thou art one of them. And Peter said, man, I am not. So, you know how it says after a little, meaning a short period of time. And then it says in verse 59, and about an hour having intervened, another confidently affirmed, saying, in truth, this man was with him, for he is also a Galilean. So, he says an hour intervened. He's talking about the hour intervening meaning from 11 o'clock when this whole was taking place to midnight. It makes you think that the denials took place over an hour. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is from the time of the garden coming in there and being betrayed, this whole thing was from 11 to midnight. That's what was going on. So he says in verse 60, and Peter said, man, I know not what thou sayest. And immediately while he was yet speaking, the cock crew. And the Lord turning looked on Peter, and this is where Luke locks in where they locked eyes. And you don't find that in Matthew and Mark. But Luke wants you to know when Peter denied him, as soon as he did, verse 61, then the Lord turned, looked on Peter, and Peter was reminded of the declaration of the Lord, how he said to him before the cock crows, today you're denying me thrice. And he going out wept bitterly. Now when you see that phrase, and going out wept bitterly, yeah, now you get it, right? He didn't just sin against him, but as soon as he does, he looks and locks eyes with him. That's demoralizing. Demoralizing. Imagine I'm not going to sit here and name them. Don't name it out loud. But in your mind, think of the worst sin in your life that you've done. And imagine as soon as you got finished doing it, the very second you finished, you locked eyes with Jesus. How would you feel? Probably disgusted with yourself. How do you think Jesus made Peter feel? Not that he's trying to be mean, but just looking at it, just being who he is. He's just Jesus. Peter felt like trash. He's like, oh my gosh. And he wept bitterly. In verse 63, those men who had him in custody derided and beat him, meaning Jesus, and having blindfolded him. So this is what Luke says. Mark said he put a sack over his head, right, a cloth. Here he says he blindfolded them. Divine who it is that struck you, and many other things. They blasphemously spoke against him. See, Luke wants you to know there's many more things they said. So they were basically having sport with him, bullying him. Verse 66, and when it was day, the eldership of the people, both high priests and scribes, were assembled, led them to the Sanhedrin, saying, if thou art the Messiah, tell us. And he said to them, if I inform you, you will not believe. And if I interrogate, you will not answer. But from this time the Son of Man will sit at the right hand of the power of God. And they all said, thou art then the Son of God? And he said to them, you say, I am. Ego eimi. And they said, what further need have we of testimony, since we ourselves have heard this from his own mouth? Then you got to chapter 23 of Luke, and the whole multitude of them rising up led him to Pilate. This is where Herod and Pilate come in. Luke mentions it. And they began to accuse him, saying, we found this man misleading our nation. This is, by the way, where some people take verse 2 and say, you see, Jesus didn't pay taxes. It's a lie, you doofus. So in Luke 23, verse 2, it says, this man misled our nation, forbidding to pay tax to Caesar, and saying that he himself is an anointed king. People read that and say, see, Jesus didn't pay tax, you shouldn't either. That was an accusation. That wasn't a true statement. You can't discern that? Come on, guys. Jesus even said to Peter, give to Caesar what is Caesar's. What are you talking about? He had a strata going out of the fish's mouth and gave it for both of them. That's a lie. Jesus did pay taxes. It was an accusation they made. And in verse 3, and Pilate asked him, saying, art thou the king of the Jews? And he answered him and said, thou sayest. I mean, Jesus said, thou sayest. He's just, not few words. Then Pilate said to the high priests and the crowds, I find nothing criminal in this man. But they were urgent, saying, he stirred up the people, teaching in all Judea, beginning with Galilee, even to this place. You see, Pilate heard the word Galilee, see? Then Pilate, hearing of Galilee, asked if the man was a Galilean. And in verse 7, he ascertained that he was of the province of Herod. Sent him to Herod, who was in Jerusalem in those days. And this is what Matthew and Mark don't record. So Luke's recording how Matthew mentions the scarlet robe and Mark mentions the purple robe is because in between there, he went to Herod, because Pilate judged him twice. So that's what is going on here. So Luke's wanting to fill the gap in for you. So in verse 8, Herod, seeing Jesus, was very glad. Because Herod was a bisexual jerk. Because he had wished for a long time to see him, because he had heard about him, and he hoped to see some sign done by him. Don't forget that Herod's father was a dillweed, and it was said it's better to be a pig than to be his family, because he killed brothers and family members who just looked at him funny.
He had no loyalty to family whatsoever. His father. So this is not a good guy. Okay? So his dad was a jerk. He's a jerk. They're just all jerks. So in verse 9, he questioned him in many words, but he answered him nothing. And the high priest and the scribes stood up and vehemently accused him. So the high priest and scribes, remember this now, they're in Galilee, and they traveled all, in Judea, in Jerusalem for the feast. They traveled all the way to Galilee just to follow Jesus to Herod's place. It was a Roman issue, but they wanted to follow until, like that. It's just that's what you have some serious vitriol. You have no. It's not in your hands. It's in the Romans' hands. They're the empire that runs the show. It's under their province, under their rule. But they wanted to be involved because they wanted to have their say. That's how much they hated him. They traveled up to Galilee, a good couple days journey, by the way, 3 days journey. They just travel up there. Hours journey. They don't care. A couple hours up, they travel just to have a word to say. Vehemently accuse him. Verse 11. Herod with his soldiers treated him with contempt, and having in derision arrayed with him a splendid robe, sent him back to Pilate, which again is a white robe. And so Herod treats him with contempt. The people, the Pharisees follow them there, the high priest, and the scribes, I should say. They treat him vehemently. Verse 12, Herod and Pilate, watch this, became friends to each other on that day. Before they had been enemies with each other. Enmity with each other. So the old thing, the enemy of my enemy is my friend? That's kind of what's going on here. That is sad. Like you became friends over a mutual hatred of Jesus. What's that? That's crazy. That's like somebody going, hey, how'd you guys meet? We both cheated on our spouses. And by the way, I know folks like that. And that's not a good thing. That's like they say, yeah, I committed adultery on my wife, and I committed adultery on my husband. That's how we met. And you're okay to say it out loud? they don't. It's crazy. I've heard it. It's so insane. So imagine you're saying, you guys are friends? Yeah, over what? Oh, a mutual hatred of Jesus. What's that? That's crazy. That's not a good reason to be friends. Verse 13, Pilate having called the high priest and the rulers and the people, said to them, you have brought this man to me as one who misleads the people. And behold, having examined him in your presence, I have not found this man guilty of the crimes you bring against him. Nor indeed has Herod, for he sent him back again to you. And behold, nothing worthy of death has been done by him. This kind of, Luke builds more of the reason why Pilate was basically exhausted and exasperated with these people's constant vehement cries to crucify him. He's like, look guys, I already scourged him. I found he was in Galilee. I sent him to Herod. I found nothing wrong with him. He found nothing wrong with him. I already scourged him. We're done with this. He wouldn't let it go. That's what Luke is kind of bringing out for here. He wants you to see this dilemma that Pilate's in. Like, he did everything he could do in his mind, and he just kowtowed and gave in. So in verse 16, it says, having chastened him, therefore I will release him, meaning scourged him, right? And verse 17, for it was necessary to release one of them at the feast. Then they all exclaimed with one accord, saying, take away this man and release to us Barabbas, who had been cast into prison for a certain insurrection made in the city and a murder. Pilate therefore again addressed them, wishing to release Jesus, but they cried, saying, crucify, crucify him. Now in John, they're going to say, away, away with him, which means Azazel, Azazel. In the Old Testament, that was what they would say when they would say to the priest to put his hands on the scapegoat, and they would say, away, away. That was their scapegoat, took away their sins. They were fulfilling prophecy. You're calling him your scapegoat. Exactly. He's taking your sins. He's sending them away. They didn't even know what they were saying. They were saying away, away with him. They were calling him the scapegoat. He's like, exactly. I am the scapegoat, taking on your sin. That's exactly right. I'm your paschal lamb, and I'm also your scapegoat. It's unbelievable. So, in verse 18 and 19, he talks about this Barabbas. In verse 20, Pilate wants to release Jesus, and they, verse 21, say, crucify, crucify him. Verse 22 of Luke 23, and again he said a third time, for what? Has this man done evil? I have found no cause of death in him. Having chastened him, therefore I will release him. And they were urging with loud voices, demanding him to be crucified, and their cries prevailed. And Pilate decided to satisfy the request. He released him, who had been cast into prison for insurrection and murder, whom they desired, and delivered up Jesus to their will. And as they led him away, having laid hold of Simon, a certain Cyrenian, all three gospel writers record Simon,
Coming from the country, they laid the cross on him that he might carry it after Jesus. By the way, this is where people get mistaken. There's this whole idea that Jesus, he had a beam like tied to his back, and so Jesus couldn't stand, and you can't brace yourself. So they were leaning. He was like carrying this beam with him because he couldn't carry it. So, and the beam formed a cross because when the beam is strapped to your back and you have a beam in the ground, when you put a cross beam on a vertical beam, it forms a cross. So people say, did he carry a cross? No, it was the beam strapped to his back that formed a cross. And that's why in some of the Galatians accounts that say he was staked on a tree. He was. It was a beam, and he was staked to it. So Jehovah's Witnesses think he was crucified like this. No, you don't. He was crucified like this. They go, no, it didn't say that. It says he was staked. Because he was already with a beam attached to him, and that was then nailed to the other beam, which formed a cross. Any other area that you're dumb in, it's just, it formed a cross. If it wasn't a cross, it formed one. So it's a different word. So this, because the word here for cross is this word stake. I get it. So, and he might carry after Jesus. In verse 27, and they were following him a great multitude of the people who lamented and bewailed him. Only Luke records this about the women. But Jesus, turning to them in verse 28, says, Daughters of Jerusalem, weep not for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, days are approaching in which they will say, Happy the barren, even the wombs which never bore, and the breasts which never suckled. And they will begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. For if these things are done while the tree is green, what will be done when it is dry? Meaning Jesus is the fertile tree of life. When he is there with us, and these things can happen. What's happening when he's not going to be with us? Which we see what's happening. Girls can be boys, boys can be girls. It's so crazy. So, verse 32 of Luke now gets interesting about these criminals again. Because Matthew mentioned they were cursing him on the way to the cross. Mark mentioned they both cursed him when he was on the cross, and so were they. And then Luke gets a little different added flavor to it in verse 32. Now the two others who were criminals, two others with them that were criminals, it says they were led with him to death, to be put to death. And they came to that place which is called Skull. There they nailed him to the cross, and the criminals, one at his right hand, one at his left, so he's in the middle of those two guys. Then Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. First thing he said, having divided his garments, they cast lots. And who is he saying forgive them? To the Pharisees, the high priests, the Sadducees, the ones making fun of him, which is unbelievable. People stood gazing, and the rulers also scoffed, saying, He saved others, let him save himself. If he is the son of the Messiah, the chosen of God. And the soldiers also derided him, coming near, offering him vinegar, and saying, If thou art the king of the Jews, save yourself. And there was also an inscription over him, This is the king of the Jews. And one of the criminals who were suspended reviled him, saying, Art thou the Messiah, save yourself. And here goes the key verse in Luke 23 to show you there's another fourth person here. Verse 40, but the heterox, which is the other, the different from, that's the word in the Greek, the heterox, verse 40 in Luke 23, the other rebuked, which is he said, shut up, saying, Thou shalt not even fear God, since thou art under the same sentence. How can that be the same guy in Mark 14 that was already in Mark 15 that was cursing Jesus? That makes no sense. On the cross he curses him, and all of a sudden he changes his mind and says, Hey, shut up. You just cursed him a second ago. That makes no sense unless you're a different guy, which here in verse 40 it says he's a different guy. It says the heterox, the other one. But in verse 41, and we indeed justly we receive what is due for the deeds we have done, but this man has done nothing amiss. And remembered, and he said to Jesus, Remember me when you come into your kingdom. And he said, Indeed I say to you, this day you'll be with me in paradise. So much for soul sleep, Seventh-day Adventist. He went from that point to paradise. He's with Jesus. So there's no soul sleep. Those who believe in Jesus, you go from here to being in heaven, on either the paradise part or the captive part, but you're still going to be in his presence in a general sense. But the idea here is interesting is because here he says again, remember me coming to your kingdom. He didn't get baptized. He didn't repent. He just said he believed in Jesus. He just said, this is God. Don't you fear God? And he asked Jesus to remember him. That's all that happened. No repentance, no baptism, none of that stuff. So, and again, you have people that don't understand this because they don't think straight. So how is there a fourth guy? Because no one's crucified multiple people at the same time. So there's probably another guy already up there, or more than one other guy already up there, already on the cross, a cross. And then while Jesus is coming up with 2 other criminals, he's crucified between those 2 guys. So there's Jesus, and those 2 guys and Jesus be crucified. Another guy's over here, seeing them come up and be crucified and pulled up, and he's the one who says, y'all need to shut up. That makes sense. Plus, it makes sense, how can it be one of these 2 guys who reviled him on the way up there, and then on the cross do it, then all of a sudden one of them goes, oh, sorry, remember calling your kingdom. That makes no sense. How you would be reviling him an hour prior, and then on the cross, and then seconds later, oh, don't you fear God? You mean like you just didn't do a second ago? That makes no sense. Makes no sense, unless there's a 4th guy. So, there you go. So, with that said, Jesus then is in this situation where you have, verse 44, now there was a 6th hour, and there was darkness over the whole land, till the 9th hour. Sun failing, and the veil of the temple was rent in the midst. Verse 46, Luke 23. And the Jews exclaimed with a loud voice, saying, Jesus exclaimed with a loud voice, and he said, Father, into your hands I commit, which is an ongoing tense, my spirit, and it says that he commit the breath of me, and having he said this, he breathed out. This goes back to what Solomon said in Ecclesiastes, that the spirit is the golden bowl when it's broken, and the silver cord is the soul that's loosed, and the cistern and fountain is the body that breaks. That's the order which we leave this earth. The spirit goes first, sometimes the same time with the soul, but the spirit leads the case, then the soul, then the body. So what Jesus is saying here is, his spirit went up to heaven, which is first, then his soul went to paradise. I didn't write it, that's what it says. He said, you have to commit my spirit, but it says in Ephesians, he descended for he ascended. So you explain it. That's what happened. He was in 3 places. Spirit was in heaven, soul was in the grave, and his body went to soul went to the paradise, and his body went to the grave. It's that simple. People go, what? I didn't. And he's the one who said, I commit, in the plural tense. I commit, meaning both spirit to the heavenlies, and then outwardly he commits his soul to God too. But that's the part that went down to paradise. And then in verse 47, and the centurion, seeing what had occurred, glorified God, saying, truly this man was righteous. And all the crowds had come together to this spectacle, having beheld the things which occurred, returned, beating their breast. By the way, this is why people that are Catholics, if you don't know this, my mom was an avid Catholic, and you'll see in the Catholic program of service, the hymnal they call it, when it comes to the communion service, the Eucharist, they will have a part, I'm not making this up, and parents, they'll say, for the women, it says, beat your breast. And I see my mom, I can see it like it was yesterday, every single Eucharist time that the priest would go, and she'd go like this. They got that from right here. They got that from the fact when Jesus was dying, crucified on the cross. Behold, things which occurred, they returned, beating their breast. They saw him die, and they're going, oh man. So they think because he's been crucified again in the Eucharist, they're reliving the same pain the women felt when they saw him die in real life. I'm like, are you serious? He's not dying again and again and again. It happened one time and it's done. You can't just relive and relitigate it every single Sunday. It's crazy. And by the way, they do it every time they meet, by the way. Every single Mass, they do the Eucharist. So even at a funeral, they do it, which is like, dude, stop. So in verse 49, and all this acquaintance and those women who had followed him from Galilee stood at a distance beholding these things. And behold, a man named Joseph, a senator, a good and righteous man, who had not consented to the designs and deeds. You see how it's building on him from Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Now Luke's going to comment on him being a person. He may have not been courage enough to stand up against them, but he wasn't part of their design to, deceive and get him to be killed. He wasn't a part of that. He was definitely not a part of that. So of Arimathea, a city of the Jews, and he was waiting for the kingdom of God. This man coming to Pilate asked for the body of Jesus, having taken it down, wrapped it in linen, taken it in a tomb cut out of a rock, which no one has ever been laid in. It was a day of preparation, and the Sabbath approached. And the woman followed after and had accompanied him from Galilee, saw the tomb, and now his body was laid. And returning, they prepared aromatics and ointments and rested on the Sabbath according to the commandment. They were preparing for these 3 days, since tonight after 6, all the way through Sunday morning. Mary Magdalene and the rest of those 5 women couldn't wait to take all this preparation and give honor to Jesus and his body, to add more of these aromatics to him. But they were waiting for it. Last gospel writer is John. We're going to go to John 18. In John 18, and leading up to this point, I'm not going to read from the Last Supper in John. I'll be here all night. Because John, Last Supper starts in John 13. Let me highlight it for you. Judas betrays Jesus. We already saw that. But the thing in John is, John says that Jesus washed all their feet before this. What's interesting about John, one verse I want to show you, one verse in John 13, leading into the Last Supper of the night of last night, it says, Jesus made an interesting statement. In verse 1 of chapter 13 of John, now Jesus, knowing before the feast of Passover, this hour was come, that he should depart out of this world to the Father, having loved those his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. Why even say that? It's the only time that that's said. John wanted you to know his love did not wane. His love was the same until the very last breath. That means he loved Judas and he loved Peter until the end. He never said, except for that Yahoo jerk, no. He wanted to make sure you knew what you're about to read, all this garbage about to happen to him, he was still filled with love to the end. How? That's just crazy to me. Crazy insane. First verse, chapter 13, we want you to know that. Then he goes into being a servant, washing their feet. Judas betrays him. He says this very moment God was glorified. John 14, he gives the promise of the mansions to the 11 disciples. Why wait till then? Why do it just to them? But it's for everybody. Why not mention it earlier? Just asking for a friend. Then he says, show me the Father. I am the Father. Chapter 15, I'm the vine. You're the branches. You don't abide in me, I'll cut you off. They're like, dude, would you relax? Then chapter 16, he says something very interesting to them. For chapter 18. 16 and 17. 17 is the big prayer of intimacy about him and the Father. He wants them to be one with him as he is one with the Father. Very intimate prayer that Matthew, Mark, and Luke do not record. They record Gethsemane. John records the prayer before Gethsemane, before he crosses the Kidron Valley. But in John 16, something interesting also was said. Jesus said, I'm not going to leave you orphans. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to leave you an orphan. It actually says in John 14, in verse 18, I will not leave you orphans. I am coming to you. Why would he say that? So in John 14, I won't leave you orphans. John 16 talks about the Holy Spirit. So why would he say that? Because they're the only people. I want you to think about this as you read the book of John. The apostles, to justify how they were feeling, they're the only people that can say this in the history of humankind. No one else can say this but them. They knew Jesus and walked with God Almighty in their presence for 3 years, and then he just left. And they had nothing. They were dead spiritually, and they had Jesus for 3 years, and he goes, I'm out, and leaves, and gives them nothing. He's not there. The Holy Spirit's not there. They are feeling like they've been abandoned. They feel like they're orphans. That's why he said that. They're the only ones who knows what that is like. We will never know that. Never. Because once Jesus rose from the dead, Holy Spirit resides in us always. And we will never know what it's like to be orphaned by God. They felt abandoned, and he wanted them to know, I know you're going to feel that way, but don't think that. It's just a 3-day thing. So when you think about the disciples and the women, when you go, but they're kind of boneheads. First of all, they weren't spiritually alive. They didn't have the Holy Spirit, and they didn't have Jesus, but they already had Jesus for 3 years, and now he's gone. Could you even relate to that? I can't relate to that. I can't relate to knowing who he is intimately and have him ripped from me, and for 3 days, I'm just abandoned. That must be gut-wrenching. So that's what they were going through. I want to keep that in your mind. So when you see these crucifixion things happen, they're going through this. He's leaving us. There's no way. It's like their whole. When you get somebody, I've read books about this many times, being in ministry. When you're married 50 plus years, they say when your spouse dies, the other spouse dies within 5 years of that spouse, typically speaking. When you're married 50 plus years, a high propensity of people die right after that within 5 years. Not all of them, but a high percentages do, right? Because it's hard to live without the person you've been with that long in your life. They also say, when you're married 50 plus years, when someone dies, it's like losing a member of your body. It's like your arm's gone. Imagine your arm, losing your arm in an accident today, how that would feel to you, losing your leg. It's not normal to just, oh yeah, no, it takes time to get used to that. So they're losing, he was the center of their life, and he's just been ripped from them. So it's a big earth-shattering, upside-down world event for them. So you got to keep this in mind. We have never and will never experience. Job experienced something we'll never experience. with the level of hellacious temptation by Satan and all the hellacious stuff he had to go through, that condensed period of time and all that stuff, no one's going to have that ever happen to them. But the apostles are similar. No one's going to ever happen to them what they had, which is 3 days after knowing Jesus and having Holy Spirit live in them. In between 3 days, to just being in darkness. Jesus even mentioned this. He mentioned this to them. And so you see that that's what they're going through. So in chapter 18, the book of John, Jesus saying these things about his prayer, about wanting to be one in him as he is with the Father. Jesus saying these things, went out with his disciples beyond the brook Kedron, where he went was serving. Where was the garden into which he entered and his disciples. And that's where, see, this is Gethsemane after that, but John doesn't talk about what happened there. He focuses on the first prayer, which Matthew, Mark, and Luke didn't even go into. They focused on Gethsemane, which was the Lord and God the Son, God the Father praying, whereas John records him praying for them specifically. It's so awesome. So truly the intimate prayer of John 17. But in John chapter 18, verse 2, now that Judas also was delivered, who also delivered him up, knew the place, meaning Gethsemane, that's where he was at now. And he crossed over the Kidron Valley of Gethsemane. Jesus often met there with his disciples. Then Judas, having obtained the band and officers from the high priests and Pharisees, comes there with torches and lamps and weapons. Jesus, therefore, knowing all these things that were coming upon him, going out, says to him, "Whom do you seek?" And they answered, "Jesus the Nazarene." He says to them, "I am Jesus." Love it. And that Judas also, who delivered him up, was standing with them. And therefore he says to them, "I am." Cross out the he. That is not in the original text. They added that in English. They're doopuses. Jesus said, "I am." They went back and fell on the ground. Because they're like, he just said he was God, dude. Yeah, because Jewish guard knows what ego eimi means. They know what I am means. They're like, "You saying he's God?" And they fell back on the ground. In verse 7, then he asked them again. "Whom do you seek?" And they said, "Jesus the Nazarene." Jesus answered in verse 8, "I told you that I am." Again, there's no he. They added it. "I am. If therefore you seek me, permit these to go, that the word might be fulfilled which he said, of those whom thou hast given me, I lost not one." I lost no one. But Simon Peter, having a sword, see now it tells you it's him in the book of John. Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and struck the servant with the high priest and cut off his right ear tip. Now the servant's name was Malchus, so John clarifies who drew the sword and whose ear it was that was cut. Names them both. Simon Peter drew the sword, it was Malchus whose ear was cut. Verse 11, Jesus therefore said to Peter, "Put the sword into the scabbard, and the cup which the Father has given me, shall I not drink it?" Another evidence that John amplifying Jesus' deity. And in verse 11, if he was questioning, "Oh, I don't want to do this," then why would he say to Peter, "Would you put that away? I got to do this." But then why say that? He had no doubts about doing it. That's ridiculous. That's why John wants you to know that he's showing the human experience of taking on sin. He never once questioned following through with it. If that was true, then why would, after the Gethsemane prayer, he say this to Peter in verse 11? Do I have to do this? Well, he said it. I got to do it. Verse 12, then the band and the commander and the officers of the Jews apprehended Jesus and bound him. So it sees they seized him in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Now John wants to add to the fact they actually bound him up. They tied him up. And here's verse 13. It's different than Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Now it says, "Led him first to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was high priest that year." Now Caiaphas was the one having advised the Jews that it is expedient that one man, look at what Caiaphas says, like an arrogant, pompous jerk, the truth without knowing it, that it is expedient that one man be destroyed on behalf of the people. Exactly. But he means it as in murder him. He doesn't mean like he's going to pay our sin debt. But you're saying the right thing the wrong way. It's like, yeah. And then he says in verse 15, and Simon Peter followed Jesus, also the other disciple, and that disciple was known to the high priest and went with Jesus into the place of the high priest. That's not John, that's Judas he's talking about. Verse 16, but Peter stood at the door without, therefore that other disciple, who was acquainted with the high priest, that's Judas, went out and spoke to the doorkeeper and brought in Peter. So Judas was in there first and goes, "Peter, I'll let you in." So again, Judas was not a bad guy. He was just, he's like, "You're with me. You want to see what comes up, what comes of this." He's trying to help Peter out. Again, Judas is not as bad as you think he is. So then the female servant, the doorkeeper, says to Peter, "Art thou also this man's disciples?" He says, "I am not." Verse 18, the servants of the officers, having made, here's what John tells you what kind of fire it was. Fire of coals, as in a charcoal fire, because it was cold, stood and warmed themselves, and Peter also was standing with them and warming himself. Then the high priest asked Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. Interesting. They said about his disciples and his teaching. See, Matthew, Mark, and Luke don't mention them asking about the disciples and the teaching. But John does in verse 19 of chapter 18. Verse 20, Jesus answering them, I have spoken publicly to the world. I always taught in the synagogue and in the temple, where all the Jews come together, and in secret I said nothing. And again, why do you ask me? Art thou having heard that I said to them, behold, they know what things I said. And having said these things, one of the officers standing by gave Jesus a blow, meaning they punched him, saying, dost thou answer the high priest? They thought he was mocking him because Jesus how dare he speak back to him that way? If I spoke evil, testify concerning the evil, but if well, why do you beat me? Jesus is basically exposing their hypocrisy. And then verse 24, Annas sent him, having been bound, to Caiaphas the high priest. This is how you know there was 3 trials of the Jews. Annas first, then Caiaphas, then the Sanhedrin. You're about to find out these wackadoodle freak shows in the middle of the night, because you have to do Passover between 6 p.m. last night and 6 p.m. tonight. You have to do Passover between 6 p.m. Tuesday, 6 p.m. Wednesday. That's Wednesday to a Jew, between the 2 eves on that day. And so they're not doing this because they're too busy trying to be ugly to Jesus. So in the middle of doing all this to Jesus, watch what happens. Watch how these dillweeds take some time out to do Passover because they're straight up evil. So watch that hypocrisy. So you say this in verse 25. Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. Then they said to him, art thou one of the disciples? And he denied and said, I am not. One of the servants in verse 26, being a relative of him, whose ear Peter cut off, says, did I not see you in the garden with him? Then Peter again denied. Immediately the cock crew. Then they led Jesus from Caiaphas into the praetorium, and it was now morning. You see? It's the morning. And they went into the praetorium so that they might not be defiled, that they might eat the Passover. So they took time out between doing a mock trial and breaking the law of Moses to think, okay, I'm going to honor God now as I'm breaking the law and filled with hate and malice and bitterness and want to trumped up charges to kill the man. In between all that, God's going to honor me in my Passover sacrifice. Are you serious right now? That's what they were doing. That's what it says. What? Because they knew they had to do it between the 2 eves, and they didn't have time to do that yet. They were so busy trying to find a way to get him. They go, oh, sure, we got to do the Passover too. So, in verse 29, Pilate therefore went out to them and said, what accusation do you bring against this man? Pilate's like, you guys are a bunch of religious zealots, and this is all religious issues, nothing to do with me. So verse 30, they answered and said to him, if he was not one who does evil, we would not have delivered him up to you. And Pilate said to them, verse 31, take you him and judge him according to your law. The Jews said to him, it is not lawful for us to kill anyone, that the word of Jesus might be verified, which he spoke, intimating by what death he was about to die, meaning crucified. Pilate therefore went into the praetorium again and called Jesus and said to him, art thou king of the Jews? Jesus answering, does now say this is from yourself, or did others tell you concerning me? So it's interesting. Jesus is asking him, why do you say that? And remember, Jesus is saying, I'm going to be crucified because the Jews have no authority to kill anybody, and the Romans were the ones who kill people by crucifixion. So by saying crucified, he's basically telling you Romans are going to kill me. Without saying Romans are going to kill me, that's what he's saying. But who's behind it is the Jews. Romans are going to execute the killing, but the Jews are going to be the ones who are accused of the ones that are guilty of killing Jesus. The Jews are the ones who killed him. The Romans carried it out under their judicial system. So Jesus is asking Pilate, how do you know I'm king of the Jews? Why do you say this? From yourself, or did others tell you concerning me? And Pilate answered, am I a Jew? Smart aleck. Then own nation, even though high priests have delivered you to me. What did you do? Pilate's being a little smarty pants, saying, am I a Jew? I don't know. I'm just telling you what they told me. So in verse 36, I love what Jesus says here, verse 36 and 37, this exchange between Jesus and Pilate. Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my officers would fight, so I might not be delivered up to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from hence. Does that sound like a spiritual kingdom to you? No. It's a literal kingdom. Hence the Palm Sunday, save us now, King of Israel, coming King, Son of David, all that. Verse 37, Pilate therefore says to him, art thou not a king then? Jesus answered, thou sayest, I am a king. For this I have been born, and for this I have come into the world, that I may testify of the truth. Everyone who's of the truth hears my voice. I love it. John goes more into detail of this exchange between Pilate and Jesus. No one else goes into the detail. Matthew, Mark, and Luke don't do this, but John does. He wants you to know the exchange. And then Pilate says to him, "What is truth?" And saying this, he went out again to the Jews and says to them, "I find no fault in him, but it is a customary for you that I release for you one during the Passover. Are you willing, therefore, that I release you the King of the Jews?" Then they cried out again, saying, "Not him, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a robber. In the last chapter for tonight. Then Pilate, therefore, took and scourged Jesus, which means he flogged him bad. If you've seen the movie The Passion, it's awful. And it is true. It's a leather whip with a lamb shank bone and a metal ball. The whole claw thing that Mel Gibson did, that's a whole poetic narrative there. That's not of the actual description of what they did. Was it possible? Maybe, but it wasn't the traditional whip. The whip was a leather and a metal ball, followed by tied in there with a knife, and then tied with a lamb shank bone, like it's just sharp. So that would hurt a lot. So it bruises you, and then it rips your skin. And you keep doing that, 39 lashes minus 40, that's a lot. If you watch The Passion, you can't watch it without crying your eyes out. When the guy goes like that, to flip him over, that's insane, because it rips his skin on one side, and they do it on his front as well, and it's just horrific. Mel Gibson wants to go over the top and show you how brutally scourged he was, because 39 lashes is a lot. It's a lot. It's just a lot. I can't imagine having one of those, let alone 39. That's a lot. So when you find him scourging him, and he says, "And the soldiers wreathing placed it on his head, a crown of thorns, and around him a purple mantle. And they came and him and said, 'Hail, King of the Jews!' And they gave him blows, punched him again. And Pilate went out again, and he says to them, 'Behold, I bring him out to you, that you may know that I find no fault in him.' Then Jesus came out wearing the Achaean crown and the purple mantle, and he said to them, 'Behold the man.' When therefore the high priest and the officers saw him, they cried out, saying, 'Crucify, crucify him!' Pilate says to them, 'Take him for yourselves and crucify him. I find no fault in him.' The Jews answered him, 'And we have a law, and by the law he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God.' When Pilate therefore heard this word, he was more afraid. Yeah, because his wife told him, 'Don't mess with him. He's a righteous man.' And again he went to the praetorium and says to Jesus, 'Who are you?' But Jesus gave him no answer. Pilate then says to him, 'Dost thou not speak to me? Dost thou not know that I have authority to release you and have authority to crucify you?' So you see what's going on. John's showing you the exchange of the second time that he scourged him and put a purple robe on him. He scourged him the first time, put a red robe on him, ripped that off him, sent him to Herod. Herod made fun of him, punched, smacked him, and all this, smacked him, and then put a white robe. They took that off him, and then this has happened. So there's 2 times he's been scourged, and then the robe's been on him, and they're about to take this one off him as well. They're not nice at all. Jesus is he's going through all kinds of hemorrhaging, all kinds of blood loss. It's just horrific at this point. And so he's in no mood for a conversation. He needs medical attention. But they don't care. So Jesus answered him, 'Thou wilt have no authority against me if thou hast not been given from above. On this account he delivered me to you has a greater sin.'" Oh my gosh. The word Jesus to speak, can you speak that way when you're in a point of this physical, depleted nature of your mental, emotional, physical state, and nothing is going your way? Can you then speak, "God's authorities on my life to take my life"? It's like a POW person getting tortured to death, saying that to it's hard. It's insane to me. What he is saying at this point of this physical, emotional stress is amazing. Full control of his mind. So hard to think about this. Verse 12, from this time, Pilate sought to release him. Because Pilate thought, this is unworldly. No man could speak so with certainty, with such clarity, with such calm, given the hemorrhaging, the pain, the agony, the trauma. And Jews cried out, saying, "If thou release him, thou art not a friend of Caesar. Everyone who makes himself a king speaks against Caesar." You see, now they're trying to get under Pilate's skin. We're going to tell him that you let him go, and he claimed to be a king, and you didn't make him pay for that, and that's treason. And Caesar's going to get you for it. And if he doesn't get you for that, we're going to make a big stink and make an uprising. We'll get you for that or that. We'll get you for something. You better do what we say, or we're going to make life hell for you. And so Pilate, therefore, in verse 13, having heard these words, brought Jesus out, sat down on the tribunal in place called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. So that means that Pilate, in the movies, they always show Pilate equal with Jesus. No, A tribunal bimetos, of the very nature of its word, means lifted up platform. So Jesus is looking up at him. He's not on even ground. Nuh-uh. He's looking up, which gives us the idea what we'll be doing when we get judged by Jesus. We're not looking at him, we're looking up at him, which is how it should be. I got no problem with that. Because here's Jesus, ironically, looking up at Pilate. He sees judging looking down at him, when it's us looking up at Jesus, and the end of it all, him looking down at us. So, in verse 14, and interesting enough, he's the one, Jesus is being silent, hearing these accusations, when it's going to be reversed when it comes to our time. We're the ones being silent, hearing what's said about us, but it's not going to be accusations, it's going to be the truth. And then here's verse 14. Now was the preparation of the Passover, and the hour was about the 6th, and saying to the Jews, behold your king. Then he cried out, here's verse 15, then they cried out, away, away, which is Azazel, Azazel, no way. They were fulfilling the scapegoat symbolism, what they would do back in the day. When they put their sins on the scapegoat, take their sins away, and then the Paschal lamb is, again, offering up for their sin debt. It's so crazy. In verse 15, Pilate says to them, shall I crucify your king? And the high priest answered, we have no king except Caesar. That's cold. Then therefore he delivered him to them, that he might be crucified. Then they took Jesus, and putting the cross on him, again that means a stake which is on the beam of his back, and then he went out into that was called the skull, the place of the skull, which is signified in Hebrew Golgotha, where they crucified him, and 2 others with him on each side, and Jesus in the middle. And Pilate wrote a title and placed it on the cross. Now that having been written was Jesus the Nazarene, King of the Jews. This title therefore many of the Jews read, because of the place was near the city where Jesus was crucified, and it was written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. And the high priest, because of the Jews, said to Pilate, do not write the King of the Jews, but that it said, that he said, I am King of the Jews. Pilate answered, what I have written, I have written. So think about this, because people say, he was buried on a cross with no top to it. His head was above the cross. And how do you see a sign above his head then? You're making no sense, bro. Of course it was a higher cross. That's where the sign went. No one, so Bill O'Reilly's wrong. He's wrong about a lot of things. He's Catholic, big shocker. So he gets things wrong. So that part's wrong. Okay? So you have this idea here when you say, he says, I wrote what I wrote. Verse 23, the soldiers, when they had nailed Jesus to the cross, took his garments, made 4 parts to each soldier, a part, but his coat was without seam, woven from the top to the hole. And they said therefore to each other, let us not tear it, but cast lots for it. Who shall it be? But the scripture might be verified. They divided my garments among themselves, and upon my raiment they cast a lot. The soldiers therefore did these things. That's all in Psalm 22. It talks all about it. It's part of the my God, why have you forsaken me? He said that to draw your attention. Read the psalm. Read the psalm. It's all willingly being done. He's not out of control here. Here goes more of the women's names in verse 25. And they were standing by the cross of Jesus' mother and his mother's sister Mary. So there's Mary, the mother of Jesus. Mary has a sister named Mary. And the mother of Cleopas and Mary of Magdalene. Then there was also Joanna and Salome. So you actually have 7 women there, right? Jesus, therefore, seeing his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing near, says to his mother, he didn't call her mother, he says to his mother, woman, behold thy son. He says to the disciple, behold your mother. And from that hour, the disciple took her to his own. There's your proof that blood's thicker than water. Nope. It's your proof that spirit's thicker than blood, because John was not her son. She had sons. And what did they think when John's being given charge over their mom? Can you imagine? Like it's your mom, and somebody else who's not your brother by biological association is given charge by Jesus to take care of mom. That's kind of offensive to you as a daughter or son. Too bad. Jesus is like, I'm in charge of taking care of mom. I was the oldest. Dad's gone. Joseph is gone. I want to make sure that I put who in charge I choose. I choose John. Wow. That shows you that spiritual bond's thicker than blood bonds. So people who say, family's thicker than anything. No, it's not. Spiritual family's the highest, thickest relationship. Then your blood family, which is marriage, and then your other friends and all that, right? So then he goes into this and he says in that verse 28, after this, Jesus, knowing all these things that already been finished, that the scripture might be fulfilled, or fully accomplished, says, I thirst. And a vessel which placed full of vinegar, then a sponge full of vinegar was then attached to a hyssop stalk, which is part of the tradition of Passover. You take the hyssop and dip it, and the blood,
put the lintels. So hyssop was involved, and brought to it. Hyssop is a sweet, savory, like minty smell to it, which is it says his death was a sweet savor of sacrifice. What a coincidence. So he brought to his mouth. Then wherefore Jesus took the vinegar, and he said, it has been finished, and inclining his head, he expired. Which is telestai, it's finished. It means paid in full. So it's like it's an accounting term. It just means we're done. You can't pay your bill in full and send in money. They're not going to. There's nothing to pay. So, and then the Jews that the bodies might not remain on the cross during the Sabbath, and since it was the preparation for the day that the Sabbath was a great one, asked Pilate for their legs, that they might be broken and they might be taken away. And the soldiers therefore came and did indeed break the legs of the first. There's your key of the guy that Luke mentioned, because he says of the first, which is of the proton, which means there's a mia, because it's using ordinal numbers. And then he says of the proton, that's on the left side of your margin. He says of the first, and of the other who was crucified with him. So again, when you say protos, that means there's the one before that. And so who's that one? And then he says, but having come to Jesus, when he saw that was already died, they did not break his legs. So the reason he went to the first, indeed broke his legs, is because the Mia guy was already dead, which feeds into my narrative. He would have been already dead if he was on the cross before they got there. If he was hanging on there before they even got hung on there, then it makes sense he would have died first, which is why you have to break his legs. He's already dead. So that would be why they said in verse 32, they break the legs of the first, because the other guy was already dead. So they went to verse 34, and Jesus did not break his legs. Verse 34, one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and immediately there came out blood and water. Interesting enough, we talked about how did Jesus take his blood up to the mercy seat, and it's from the linen of his face, which people say, well then, how the blood would coagulate and dry, and it wouldn't be able to be sprinkled because it'd be dry on a piece of cloth. So you have to re-liquefy it, which means you need water or oil or something, right? So interesting enough, in the tabernacle on earth, as he told Moses to build, like the one in heaven, there'd be a laver outside. Oh, then what a coincidence, of water. And there would also be inside the menorah with the oil to always fill the oil up. So there'd be either one he could have used. And so that would necessitate, well, there's no problem having dry blood on his linen cloth of his face being brought to heaven, to dip it in the water of the laver outside the holy tabernacle in heaven, or in the oil used for menorah, either one or both, and then sprinkle down the mercy seat. That's also, people say, what does the blood of water represent? Well, it represents obviously sanctified by his blood and by the water of the word. Yes, it does mean that. There's also the blood of Jesus always forgiving us, plus water baptism, setting us apart for him. I get all that. But there's also the other adage of how it speaks to how he applied that blood to the mercy seat, because there was blood that was dried on that cloth. And you can't just reliquify, which God did what he wants to do, but from a practical standpoint, he would have used what was in the heavens, as he said to Moses, build on earth as it is in heaven, so he probably dipped that in that sense. Verse 35, he having seen has testified, and his testimony is true, and he knows that he is saying true things, so that you also may believe. John's talking about himself. He's so humble, never says himself. For these things occurred that the scripture might be verified, a bone of him shall not be broken. And again, another scripture says, they shall look on him whom they pierced. And after these things, Joseph of Arimathea, being a disciple of Jesus, but a concealed one through the fear of Jews. Now see, John comments on why. He tells you in fear of the Jews. Asked Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus, and Pilate permitted him, and came therefore and took away his body. So here's an interesting thing. If you're a reformed person, or a person who believes you have to live a certain way to be saved, then you're telling me John was the worst theologian ever, which is ridiculous. He's an apostle. He's the one who lived the longest, who was charged to take care of Mary, only one at the cross, the first one there at the tomb, the one who saw the end of Revelation of Jesus coming back again. And this guy says, I'm no stupid slouch, and he's telling you Joseph of Arimathea was a disciple, but just was in fear of the Jews. He didn't really live it out, which shows you can believe and not live a certain way. So what about it? Doesn't mean you're not saved. It just means that you're a coward, which Joseph of Arimathea was. He was scared of the Jews. He was in fear. So he tells you that. So in verse, again, Peter, and it says here that John's saying they took away the body of Jesus, and Pilate permitted him, and he came therefore and took away his body. Verse 39 through 42, end of our chapter. Nicodemus came also,
Having come to him by night, Nicodemus, same way, a little bit cowardly, but did believe. He was there. Brings a mixture of myrrh and aloes, and about 100 pounds. That's a lot of pounds. That's a lot. That's a lot, dude. And they took the body of Jesus and bound him with linen clothes and the Aramaics, and as it is custom with the Jews, to embalm. Again, he mentions it here. People say, well, that embalming was just Jesus mentioned that 2 days before Passover. That was just symbolism. They say it right here again when they're using the actual Aramaics to prepare him for burial. And verse 40, but not the way putting fluids in his body, but outwardly preparing him. So, I believe Pilate's wife believed in Jesus. I believe that, yes. I believe Pontius Pilate and his wife both believed in him. I mean, they both did. They were just cowards. Because that's what you see this consistently. Joseph, Arimathea, and Nicodemus. Think about this. What's the difference between Joseph, Arimathea, and Nicodemus and Pilate and his wife? They're the same way. That's a loud person outside, but you can hear that. They both were cowards in how to live out what they believed. Pilate's wife said, he's a righteous man. God came to me. God don't come to people just to go, I just say things. Well, he told her who he was, and she knew, and what she said, don't mess with him. Don't be involved with this. And then Pilate even said, he's an innocent man. I find no fault in him. And Jesus told him who he was. And so, yeah, I think they both knew they were just cowards. I think Pilate and his wife both believed they were just cowards. So they are disinherited, and they're like in the place where Judas was. They didn't live up to what they believed. They were too much cowardly. Last 2 verses of John 19 for the night. And there was in the place where he was crucified a garden, and in that garden a new tomb, in which no one was yet laid. Then, therefore, on the account of the preparation of the Jews, because the tomb was near, they laid Jesus. Which means you got from 3 o'clock he dies. They got to get him off fast to get him bound up. 100 pounds. 100 pounds is a lot to apply. That took probably an hour plus. Then you got to put him in the tomb, put the stone there, and get yourself back to your houses and be all tucked in by 6. So you got 3 hours, less than 3 hours to get all that done. And it's a lot. So they had to go move quickly. He had to go to Pilate first, petition. That took probably, who knows, half an hour, another hour to get all the body prepared, then tucked him in. We got to get back. We got way less than an hour. We're going to get out of here. So they go back home again. And then they're resting from tonight, from after 6 o'clock tonight, until Saturday, Saturday after 6 p.m., which is too dark to go out there. There's no electricity. I mean, you can't go on. They would wait till the next morning when it was light, and they went out. He had risen at midnight on Saturday. We'll talk about that on Sunday, Resurrection Sunday. So that's the end of our time. 3 hours, I thought it would be. I was almost spot on. Sorry about the length of this. I told you we're going to read all the gospel accounts. But hopefully it brings back the memories of what Jesus did for us and all the different things. There's always nuances that you can pick up on and always appreciate and want to read all the stories. I just think it's important to do it. Sorry for the length of time, but I think it's needed. So let's close in prayer, and we'll have our time for Sunday resurrection. So Father, thank you for this time, for the memories and the recollections, and just the thoughts of thinking back to what you've done and what you went through. So many things I just can't forget and get past. The fact that you were in total control of your mind and emotions and your physical traumas that you were taking on, the loss of blood, the hemorrhaging, the physical pain, this unsurmountable level of hatred and condescension. All through that, you maintained calmness. You were in full control of your words, of your emotions. And then to say that before it all started, you wanted to love them to the end is mind-blowing to me. Help us to do like that. Help us to love you to the end, no matter what life throws at us, no matter what you've ordained for us to endure. May we follow your footsteps and love hardly and love strongly and not wane no matter what life throws at us, no matter what struggles and pitfalls. Help us draw from your strength and from your will and from your example. We ask all this in Jesus, Yeshua's name we pray. Amen.
You guys came a long day. A long night, man.
Worth it. So how is the newly married couple? Good. Yeah.